The Three Musketeers, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 16, in which Monsieur Seguier, keeper of the seals, looks more than once for the bell. It is impossible to form an idea of the impression these few words made upon Louis XIII. He grew pale and red alternately, and the cardinal saw at once that he had recovered by a single blow all the ground he had lost.
"Buckingham in Paris!" cried he. "And why does he come?"
To conspire, no doubt, with your enemies, the Huguenots and the Spaniards.
No, pardieu, no. To conspire against my honour with Madame de Chevreuse, Madame de Longueville, and the Conde.
Oh, sire, what an idea! The queen is too virtuous, and besides, loves your majesty too well.
Woman is weak, Monsieur Cardinal, said the king. And as to loving me much, I have my own opinion as to that love.
I not the less maintain, said the cardinal, that the Duke of Buckingham came to Paris for a project wholly political.
And I am sure that he came for quite another purpose, Monsieur Cardinal. But if the queen be guilty, let her tremble.
Indeed, said the cardinal, whatever repugnance I may have to directing my mind to such a treason, your majesty compels me to think of it. Madame de Lannoy, whom, according to your majesty's command, I have frequently interrogated, told me this morning that the night before last her majesty sat up very late, that this morning she wept much, and that she was writing all day.
That's it, cried the king. To him, no doubt. Cardinal, I must have the queen's papers.
But how to take them, sire? It seems to me that it is neither your majesty nor myself who can charge himself with such a mission.
How did they act with regard to Maréchal d'Ancre? Cried the king, in the highest state of choler. First her closets were thoroughly searched, and then she herself.
The Maréchal d'Ancre was no more than the Maréchal d'Ancre, a Florentine adventurer, sire, and that was all. While the august spouse of your majesty is Anne of Austria, Queen of France, that is to say, one of the greatest princesses in the world.
She is not the less guilty, Monsieur Duke. The more she has forgotten the high position in which she was placed, the more degrading is her fall. Besides, I long ago determined to put an end to all these petty intrigues of policy and love. She has near her a certain Laporte,
who, I believe, is the mainspring of all this, I confess, said the cardinal.
You think, then, as I do, that she deceives me?
Said the king. I believe, and I repeat it to your majesty, that the queen conspires against the power of the king, but I have not said against his honour.
And I tell you, against both. I tell you the queen does not love me. I tell you she loves another. I tell you she loves that infamous Buckingham. Why did you not have him arrested while in Paris?
Arrest the duke. Arrest the prime minister of King Charles I. Think of it, sire. What a scandal! And if the suspicions of your majesty, which I still continue to doubt, should prove to have any foundation, what a terrible disclosure! What a fearful scandal!
But as he exposed himself like a vagabond or a thief, he should have been.
Louis XIII stopped, terrified at what he was about to say, while Richelieu, stretching out his neck, waited uselessly for the word which has died on the lips of the king. He should have been.
Nothing, said the king. Nothing. But all the time he was in Paris, you, of course, did not lose sight of him?
No, sire.
Where did he lodge?
Rue de la Harpe, number 75.
Where is that?
By the side of the Luxembourg.
And you are certain that the queen and he did not see each other?
I believe the queen to have too high a sense of her duty, sire.
But they have corresponded. It is to him that the queen has been writing all the day. Monsieur Duke, I must have those letters."
"Sire, notwithstanding—"
"Monsieur Duke, at whatever price it may be, I will have them."
"I would, however, beg your Majesty to observe—"
"Do you then also join in betraying me, Monsieur Cardinal, by thus always opposing my will? Are you also in accord with Spain and England, with Madame de Chevreuse and the Queen?"
"Sire," replied the cardinal, sighing, "I believed myself secure from such a suspicion."
"Monsieur Cardinal, you have heard me. I will have those letters."
"There is but one way."
"And what is that?"
"That would be to charge Monsieur de Séguier, the keeper of the seals, with this mission. The matter enters completely into the duties of the post."
"Let him be sent for instantly."
"He is most likely at my hotel. I requested him to call, and when I came to the Louvre I left orders, if he came, to desire him to wait."
"Let him be sent for instantly."
"Your Majesty's orders shall be executed, but—"
"But what?"
"But the Queen will perhaps refuse to obey."
"My orders?"
"Yes, if she is ignorant that these orders come from the king."
"Well, that she may have no doubt on that head, I will go and inform her myself."
"Your Majesty will not forget that I have done everything in my power to prevent a rupture."
"Yes, Duke, yes. I know you are very indulgent toward the Queen, too indulgent, perhaps. We shall have occasion, I warn you, at some future period to speak of that."
"Whenever it shall please your Majesty. But I shall be always happy and proud, sire, to sacrifice myself to the harmony which I desire to see reign between you and the Queen of France."
"Very well, Cardinal, very well. But meantime send for Monsieur the Keeper of the Seals. I will go to the Queen."
And Louis XIII, opening the door of communication, passed into the corridor which led from his apartments to those of Anne of Austria. The queen was in the midst of her women, Madame de Citeaux, Madame de Sable, Madame de Montbazon, and Madame de Guemaine. In a corner was the Spanish companion, Donna Estefania, who had followed her from Madrid. Madame Guemaine was reading aloud, and everybody was listening to her with attention, with the exception of the queen, who had, on the contrary, desired this reading in order that she might be able, while feigning to listen, to pursue the thread of her own thoughts. These thoughts, gilded as they were by a last reflection of love, were not the less sad. Anne of Austria, deprived of the confidence of her husband, pursued by the hatred of the cardinal, who could not pardon her for having repulsed a more tender feeling, having before her eyes the example of the queen mother whom that hatred had tormented all her life, though Marie de Medici, if the memoirs of the time are to be believed, had begun by according to the cardinal that sentiment which Anne of Austria always refused him. Anne of Austria had seen her most devoted servants fall around her, her most intimate confidants, her dearest favourites. Like those unfortunate persons endowed with a fatal gift, she brought misfortune upon everything she touched. Her friendship was a fatal sign which called down persecution. Madame de Chevreuse and Madame de Bernay were exiled, and Laporte did not conceal from his mistress that he expected to be arrested every instant. It was at this moment, when she plunged in the deepest and darkest of these reflections, that the door of the chamber opened and the king entered. The reader hushed herself instantly. All the ladies rose, and there was a profound silence. As to the king, he made no demonstration of politeness, only stopping before the queen. "Madame," said he, "you are about to receive a visit from the chancellor, who will communicate certain matters to you with which I have charged him." The unfortunate queen, who was constantly threatened with divorce, exile, and trial even, turned pale under her rouge, and could not refrain from saying, But why this visit, sire? What can the Chancellor have to say to me that your Majesty could not say yourself?" The king turned upon his heel without reply, and almost at the same instant the captain of the guards, Monsieur de Guiton, announced the visit of the Chancellor. When the Chancellor appeared, the king had already gone out by another door. The Chancellor entered, half smiling, half blushing. As we shall probably meet with him again in the course of our history, it may be well for our readers to be made at once acquainted with him. This Chancellor was a pleasant man. He was Desroches-le-Masle, canon of Notre Dame, who had formerly been valet of a bishop, who introduced him to his Eminence as a perfectly devout man. The cardinal trusted him, and therein found his advantage. There are many stories related of him, and among them this. After a wild youth, he had retired into a convent, there to expiate, at least for some time, the follies of adolescence. On entering this holy place, the poor penitent was unable to shut the door so close as to prevent the passions he fled from entering with him. He was incessantly attacked by them, and the superior, to whom he had confided this misfortune, wishing as much as him lay to free him from them, had advised him, in order to conjure away the tempting demon, to have recourse to the bell rope and ring with all his might. At the denunciating sound, the monks would be rendered aware that temptation was besieging a brother, and all the community would go to prayers. This advice appeared good to the future chancellor. He conjured the evil spirit with abundance of prayers offered up by the monks. But the devil does not suffer himself to be easily dispossessed from a place in which he has fixed his garrison. In proportion as they redoubled the exorcisms, he redoubled the temptations, so that day and night the bell was ringing full swing, announcing the extreme desire for mortification which the penitent experienced. The monks had no longer an instant of repose. By day they did nothing but ascend and descend the steps which led to the chapel. At night, in addition to complines and matins, they were further obliged to leap 20 times out of their beds and prostrate themselves on the floor of their cells. It is not known whether it was the devil who gave way, or the monks who grew tired, but within 3 months the penitent reappeared in the world with the reputation of being the most terrible possessed that ever existed. On leaving the convent, he entered into the magistracy, became president on the place of his uncle, embraced the cardinal's party, which did not prove want of sagacity, became chancellor, served his Eminence with zeal in his hatred against the Queen Mother and his vengeance against Anne of Austria, stimulated the judges in the affair of Calais, encouraged the attempts of Monsieur de Laffemas, chief gamekeeper of France, then, at length, invested with the entire confidence of the cardinal, a confidence which he had so well earned, he received the singular commission for the execution of which he presented himself in the queen's apartments. The queen was still standing when he entered, but scarcely had she perceived him than she reseated herself in her armchair, and made a sign to her women to resume their cushions and stools, and with an air of supreme hauteur said, "What do you desire, monsieur, and with what object do you present yourself here?" "To make, madame, in the name of the king, and without prejudice to the respect which I have the honour to owe to your majesty, a close examination into all your papers." "How, monsieur? An investigation of my papers? Mine? Truly, this is an indignity." "Be kind enough to pardon me, madame, but in this circumstance I am but the instrument which the king employs. Has not his majesty just left you, and has he not himself asked you to prepare for this visit?" "Search them, monsieur. I am a criminal, as it appears. Estefania, give up the keys of my drawers and my desks." For form's sake, the chancellor paid a visit to the pieces of furniture named, but he well knew that it was not in a piece of furniture that the queen would place the important letter she had written that day. When the chancellor had opened and shut 20 times the drawers of the secretaries, it became necessary, whatever hesitation he might experience, it became necessary, I say, to come to the conclusion of the affair, that is to say, to search the queen herself. The chancellor advanced, therefore, toward Anne of Austria, and said with a very perplexed and embarrassed air, "And now it remains for me to make the principal examination." "What is that?" asked the queen, who did not understand, or rather was not willing to understand. "His Majesty is certain that a letter has been written by you during the day. He knows that it has not yet been sent to its address. This letter is not in your table, nor in your secretary, and yet this letter must be somewhere." "Would you dare to lift your hand to your queen?" said Anne of Austria, drawing herself up to her full height, and fixing her eyes upon the chancellor with an expression almost threatening. "I am a faithful subject of the king, madame, and all that his Majesty commands I shall do." "Well, it is true," said Anne of Austria, "and the spies of the cardinal have served him faithfully. I have written a letter today. That letter is not yet gone. The letter is here." And the queen laid her beautiful hand on her bosom. "Then give me that letter, madame," said the chancellor. "I will give it to none but the king, monsieur," said Anne. "If the king had desired that the letter should be given to him, madame, he would have demanded it of you himself. But I repeat to you, I am charged with reclaiming it, and if you do not give it up—" "Well?" "He has, then, charged me to take it from you." "How? What do you say?" "That my orders go far, madame, and that I am authorized to seek for the suspected paper, even on the person of your Majesty." "What horror!" cried the queen. "Be kind enough, then, madame, to act more compliantly." "The conduct is infamously violent. Do you know that, monsieur?" "The king commands it, madame. Excuse me." "I will not suffer it. No, no, I would rather die," cried the queen, in whom the imperious blood of Spain and Austria began to rise. The chancellor made a profound reverence. Then, with the intention quite patent of not drawing back a foot from the accomplishment of the commission with which he was charged, and as the attendant of an executioner might have done in the chamber of torture, he approached Anne of Austria, from whose eyes at the same instant sprang tears of rage. The queen was, as we have said, of great beauty. The commission might well be called delicate, and the king had reached, in his jealousy of Buckingham, the point of not being jealous of anyone else. Without doubt, the Chancellor Séguier looked about at that moment for the rope of the famous bell, but not finding it, he summoned his resolution, and stretched forth his hands toward the place where the queen had acknowledged the paper was to be found. Anne of Austria took one step backward, became so pale that it might be said she was dying, and leaning with her left hand upon a table behind her to keep herself from falling, she with her right hand drew the paper from her bosom and held it out to the keeper of the seals. "There, monsieur, there is that letter," cried the queen, with a broken and trembling voice. "Take it, and deliver me from your odious presence." The chancellor, who, on his part, trembled with an emotion easily to be conceived, took the letter, bowed to the ground, and retired. The door was scarcely closed upon him when the queen sank, half fainting, into the arms of her women. The chancellor carried the letter to the king without having read a single word of it. The king took it with a trembling hand, looked for the address, which was wanting, became very pale, opened it slowly, then seeing by the first words that it was addressed to the King of Spain, he read it rapidly. It was nothing but a plan of attack against the cardinal. The queen pressed her brother and the Emperor of Austria to appear to be wounded, as they really were, by the policy of Richelieu, the eternal object of which was the abasement of the House of Austria, to declare war against France, and as a condition of peace to insist upon the dismissal of the cardinal. But as to love, there was not a single word about it in all the letter. The king, quite delighted, inquired if the cardinal was still at the Louvre. He was told that his Eminence awaited the order of his Majesty in the business cabinet. The king went straight to him.
"There, Duke," said he, "you were right and I was wrong. The whole intrigue is political, and there is not the least question of love in this letter. But, on the other hand, there is abundant question of you." The cardinal took the letter and read it with the greatest attention. Then, when he had arrived at the end of it, he read it a second time. "Well, your Majesty," said he, "you see how far my enemies go. They menace you with 2 wars if you do not dismiss me. In your place, in truth, sire, I should yield to such powerful instance, and on my part it would be a real happiness to withdraw from public affairs." "What say you, Duke?"
"I say, sire, that my health is sinking under these excessive struggles and these never-ending labours. I say that according to all probability I shall not be able to undergo the fatigues of the siege of La Rochelle, and that it would be far better that you should appoint there either Monsieur de Conde, Monsieur de Bassompierre, or some valiant gentleman whose business is war, and not me, who am a churchman, and who am constantly turned aside for my real vocation to look after matters for which I have no aptitude. You would be the happier for it at home, sire, and I do not doubt you would be the greater for it abroad."
"Monsieur Duke," said the king, "I understand you. Be satisfied. All who are named in that letter shall be punished as they deserve, even the queen herself."
"What do you say, sire? God forbid that the queen should suffer the least inconvenience or uneasiness on my account. She has always believed me, sire, to be her enemy, although your Majesty can bear witness that I have always taken her part warmly, even against you. Oh, if she betrayed your Majesty on the side of your honour, it would be quite another thing, and I should be the first to say, 'No grace, sire, no grace for the guilty.' Happily, there is nothing of the kind, and your Majesty has just acquired a new proof of it."
"That is true, Monsieur Cardinal," said the king. "And you were right, as you always are. But the queen, not the less, deserves all my anger."
"It is you, sire, who have now incurred hers. And even if she were to be seriously offended, I could well understand it. Your Majesty has treated her with a severity—"
"It is thus I who will always treat my enemies and yours, Duke, however high they may be placed, and whatever peril I may incur in acting severely toward them."
"The queen is my enemy, but is not yours, sire. On the contrary, she is a devoted, submissive, and irreproachable wife. Allow me, then, sire, to intercede for her with your Majesty."
"Let her humble herself, then, and come to me first."
"On the contrary, sire, set the example. You have committed the first wrong, since it was you who suspected the queen."
"What? I make the first advances?" said the king. "Never."
"Sire, I entreat you to do so."
"Besides, in what manner can I make advances first?"
"By doing a thing which you know will be agreeable to her."
"What is that?"
"Give a ball. You know how much the queen loves dancing. I will answer for it, her resentment will not hold out against such an attention."
"Monsieur Cardinal, you know that I do not like worldly pleasures."
"The queen will only be the more grateful to you as she knows your antipathy for that amusement. Besides, it will be an opportunity for her to wear those beautiful diamonds which you gave her recently on her birthday, and with which she has since had no occasion to adorn herself."
"We shall see, Monsieur Cardinal, we shall see," said the king, who, in his joy at finding the queen guilty of a crime which he cared little about, and innocent of a fault of which he had great dread, was ready to make up all differences with her. "We shall see. But upon my honour, you are too indulgent toward her."
"Sire," said the cardinal, "leave severity to your ministers. Clemency is a royal virtue. Employ it, and you will find that you derive advantage therein." Thereupon the cardinal, hearing the clock strike 11, bowed low, asking permission of the king to retire, and supplicating him to come to a good understanding with the queen. Anne of Austria, who in consequence of the seizure of her letter expected reproaches, was much astonished the next day to see the king make some attempts at reconciliation with her. Her first movement was repellent. Her womanly pride and her queenly dignity had both been so cruelly offended that she could not come round at the first advance. But, overpersuaded by the advice of her women, she at last had the appearance of beginning to forget. The king took advantage of this favourable moment to tell her that he had the intention of shortly giving a fête. A fête was so rare a thing for poor Anne of Austria that at this announcement, as the cardinal had predicted, the last trace of her resentment disappeared, if not from her heart, at least from her countenance. She asked upon what day this fête would take place, but the king replied that he must consult the cardinal upon that head. Indeed, every day the king asked the cardinal when this fête should take place, and every day the cardinal, under some pretext, deferred fixing it. 10 days passed away thus. On the 8th day after the scene we have described, the cardinal received a letter from the London stamp which only contained these lines: "I have them, but I am unable to leave London for want of money. Send me 500 pistoles, and 4 or 5 days after I have received them, I shall be in Paris." On the same day the cardinal received this letter, the king put his customary question to him. Richelieu counted on his fingers and said to himself, "She will arrive, she says, 4 or 5 days after having received the money. It will require 4 or 5 days for the transmission of the money, 4 or 5 days for her to return. That makes 10 days. Now, allowing for contrary winds, accidents, and a woman's weakness, there are 12 days."
"Well, Monsieur Duke," said the king, "have you made your calculations?"
"Yes, sire. Today is the 20th of September. The aldermen of the city give a fête on the 3rd of October. That will fall in wonderfully well. You will not appear to have gone out of your way to please the queen." Then the cardinal added, "A propos, sire, do not forget to tell her majesty the evening before the fête that you should like to see how her diamond studs become her." End of chapter. Chapter 17 of The Three Musketeers. Bonacieux at Home. It was the second time the cardinal had mentioned these diamond studs to the king. Louis XIII was struck with this insistence, and began to fancy that this recommendation concealed some mystery. More than once the king had been humiliated by the cardinal, whose police, without having yet attained the perfection of the modern police, were excellent, being better informed than himself, even upon what was going on in his own household. He hoped, then, in a conversation with Anne of Austria, to obtain some information from that conversation, and afterward to come upon his Eminence with some secret which the cardinal either knew or did not know, but which, in either case, would raise him infinitely in the eyes of his minister. He went then to the queen, and according to custom accosted her with fresh menaces against those who surrounded her. Anne of Austria lowered her head, allowed the torrent to flow on without replying, hoping that it would cease of itself. But this was not what Louis XIII meant, Louis XIII wanted a discussion from which some light or other might break, convinced as he was that the cardinal had some afterthought and was preparing for him one of those terrible surprises which his Eminence was so skilful in getting up. He arrived at this end by his persistence in accusation. "But," cried Anne of Austria, tired of these vague attacks, "but, sire, you do not tell me all that you have in your heart. What have I done, then? Let me know what crime I have committed. It is impossible that your Majesty can make all this ado about a letter written to my brother." The king, attacked in a manner so direct, did not know what to answer, and he thought that this was the moment for expressing the desire which he was not going to have made until the evening before the fête.
"Madame," said he, with dignity, "there will shortly be a ball at the Hôtel de Ville. I wish, in order to honour our worthy alderman, you should appear in ceremonial costume, and above all, ornamented with the diamond studs which I gave you on your birthday. That is my answer." The answer was terrible. Anne of Austria believed that Louis XIII knew all, and that the cardinal had persuaded him to employ this long dissimulation of 7 or 8 days, which likewise was characteristic. She became excessively pale, leaned her beautiful hand upon a console, which hand appeared then like one of wax, and looking at the king with terror in her eyes, she was unable to reply by a single syllable. "You hear, madame," said the king, who enjoyed the embarrassment to its full extent, but without guessing the cause. "You hear, madame?"
"Yes, sire, I hear," stammered the queen.
"You will appear at this ball?"
"Yes."
"With those studs?"
"Yes." The queen's paleness, if possible, increased. The king perceived it, and enjoyed it with that cold cruelty which was one of the worst sides of his character.
"Then it is agreed," said the king, "and that is all I had to say to you."
"But on what day will this ball take place?" asked Anne of Austria. Louis XIII felt instinctively that he ought not to reply to this question, the queen having put it in an almost dying voice.
"Oh, very shortly, madame," said he, "but I do not precisely recollect the date of the day. I will ask the cardinal."
"It was the cardinal, then, who informed you of this fête?"
"Yes, madame," replied the astonished king. "But why do you ask that?"
"It was he who told you to invite me to appear with these studs?"
"That is to say, madame—"
"It was he, sire, it was he."
"Well, and what does it signify whether it was he or I? Is there any crime in this request?"
"No, sire."
"Then you will appear?"
"Yes, sire."
"That is well," said the king, retiring. "That is well. I count upon it."
The queen made a curtsy, less from etiquette than because her knees were sinking under her. The king went away enchanted. "I am lost," murmured the queen, "lost, for the cardinal knows all, and it is he who urges on the king, who as yet knows nothing but will soon know everything. I am lost! My God, my God, my God!" She knelt upon a cushion and prayed, with her head buried between her palpitating arms. In fact, her position was terrible. Buckingham had returned to London. Madame de Chevreuse was at Tours. More closely watched than ever, the queen felt certain, without knowing how to tell which, that one of her women had betrayed her. Laporte could not leave the Louvre. She had not a soul in the world in whom she could confide. Thus, while contemplating the misfortune which threatened her, and the abandonment in which she was left, she broke out into sobs and tears. "Can I be of service to your Majesty?" said all at once a voice full of sweetness and pity. The queen turned sharply round, for there could be no deception in the expression of that voice. It was a friend who spoke thus. In fact, At one of the doors which opened into the queen's apartment appeared the pretty Madame Bonacieux. She had been engaged in arranging the dresses and linen in a closet when the king entered. She could not get out, and had heard all. The queen uttered a piercing cry at finding herself surprised, for in her trouble she did not at first recognize the young woman who had been given to her by Laporte. "Oh, fear nothing, madame," said the young woman, clasping her hands and weeping herself at the queen's sorrows. "I am your majesty's body and soul, and however far I may be from you, however inferior may be my position, I believe I have discovered a means of extricating your majesty from your trouble." "You, oh, heaven, you!" cried the queen. "But look me in the face. I am betrayed on all sides. Can I trust in you?" "Oh, madame!" cried the young woman, falling on her knees. "Upon my soul, I am ready to die for your majesty." This expression sprang from the very bottom of the heart, and like the first, there was no mistaking it. "Yes," continued Madame Bonacieux, "yes, there are traitors here. But by the holy name of the Virgin, I swear that no one is more devoted to your majesty than I am. Those studs which the king speaks of, you gave them to the Duke of Buckingham, did you not? Those studs were enclosed in a little rosewood box which he held under his arm? Am I deceived? Is it not so, madame?" "Oh, my God," murmured the queen, whose teeth chattered with fright. "Well, those studs," continued Madame Bonacieux, "we must have them back again." "Yes, without doubt, it is necessary," cried the queen. "But how am I to act? How can it be effected?" "Someone must be sent to the duke." "But who? Who? In who can I trust?" "Place confidence in me, madame. Do me that honour, my queen, and I will find a messenger." "But I must write." "Oh, yes, that is indispensable. 2 words from the hand of your majesty, and your private seal." "But these 2 words would bring about my condemnation, divorce, exile." "Yes, if they fell into infamous hands, but I will answer for these 2 words being delivered to their address." "Oh, my God! I must then place my life, my honour, my reputation in your hands?" "Yes, yes, madame, you must, and I will save them all." "But how? Tell me at least the means." "My husband has been at liberty these 2 or 3 days. I have not yet had time to see him again. He is a worthy, honest man, who entertains neither love nor hatred for anybody. He will do anything I wish. He will set out upon receiving an order from me, without knowing what he carries, and he will carry your majesty's letter, without even knowing it is from your majesty, to the address which is on it." The queen took the 2 hands of the young woman with a burst of emotion, gazed at her as if to read her very heart, and, seeing nothing but sincerity in her beautiful eyes, embraced her tenderly. "Do that," cried she, "and you will have saved my life. You will have saved my honour." "Do not exaggerate the service I have the happiness to render your majesty. I have nothing to save for your majesty. You are only the victim of perfidious plots." That is true, my child," said the queen. "You are right." "Give me, then, that letter, madame. Time presses." The queen ran to a little table, on which were ink, paper, and pens. She wrote 2 lines, sealed the letter with her private seal, and gave it to Madame Bonacieux. "And now," said the queen, "we are forgetting one very necessary thing." "What is that, madame?" "Money." Madame Bonacieux blushed. "Yes, that is true," said she, "and I will confess to your majesty that my husband—" "Your husband has none. Is that what you would say?" "He has some, but he is very avaricious. That is his fault. Nevertheless, let not your majesty be uneasy. We will find means." And I have none either, said the queen. Those who have read the memoirs of Madame de Motteville will not be astonished at this reply. But wait a minute. Anne of Austria ran to her jewel case. Here, said she, here is a ring of great value, as I have been assured. It came from my brother, the King of Spain. It is mine, and I am at liberty to dispose of it. Take this ring, raise money with it, and let your husband set out. In an hour you shall be obeyed. You see the address, said the queen, speaking so low that Madame Bonacieux could hardly hear what she said. To my Lord Duke of Buckingham, London. The letter shall be given to himself. Generous girl, cried Anne of Austria. Madame Bonacieux kissed the hands of the queen, concealed the paper in the bosom of her dress, and disappeared with the lightness of a bird. 10 minutes afterwards she was at home. As she told the queen, she had not seen her husband since his liberation. She was ignorant of the change that had taken place in him with respect to the cardinal, a change which had since been strengthened by 2 or 3 visits from the Comte de Rochefort, who had become the best friend of Bonacieux, and had persuaded him, without much trouble, that no culpable sentiments had prompted the abduction of his wife, but that it was only a political precaution. She found Monsieur Bonacieux alone. The poor man was recovering with difficulty the order in his house, in which he had found most of the furniture broken and the closets nearly emptied, justice not being one of the 3 things which King Solomon names as leaving no traces of their passage. As to the servant, she had run away at the moment of her master's arrest. Terror had had such an effect upon the poor girl that she had never ceased walking from Paris till she reached Burgundy, her native place. The worthy mercer had, immediately upon re-entering his house, informed his wife of his happy return, and his wife had replied by congratulating him, and telling him that the first moment she could steal from her duties should be devoted to paying him a visit. This first moment had been delayed 5 days, which, under any other circumstances, might have appeared rather long to Monsieur Bonacieux. But he had, in the visit he had made to the cardinal, and in the visits Rochefort had made him, ample subjects for reflection, and as everybody knows, nothing makes time pass more quickly than reflection. This was the more so because Bonacieux's reflections were all rose-colored. Rochefort called him his friend, his dear Bonacieux, and never ceased telling him that the cardinal had a great respect for him. The mercer fancied himself already on the high road to honours and fortune. On her side, Madame Bonacieux had also reflected, but, it must be admitted, upon something widely different from ambition. In spite of herself, her thoughts constantly reverted to that handsome young man who was so brave and appeared to be so much in love. Married at 18 to Monsieur Bonacieux, having always lived among her husband's friends, people little capable of inspiring any sentiment whatever in a young woman whose heart was above her position, Madame Bonacieux had remained insensible to vulgar seductions, but at this period the title of gentleman had great influence with the citizen class, and D'Artagnan was a gentleman. Besides, he wore the uniform of the Guards, which, next to that of the Musketeers, was most admired by the ladies. He was, we repeat, handsome, young, and bold. He spoke of love like a man who did love, and was anxious to be loved in return. There was certainly enough in all this to turn a head only 23 years old, and Madame Bonacieux had just attained that happy period of life. The couple, then, although they had not seen each other for 8 days, and during that time serious events had taken place in which both were concerned, accosted each other with a degree of preoccupation. Nevertheless, Bonacieux manifested real joy, and advanced toward his wife with open arms. Madame Bonacieux presented her cheek to him. "Let us talk a little," said she. How? Said Bonacieux, astonished.
Yes, I have something of the highest importance to tell you.
True, said he, and I have some questions sufficiently serious to put to you. Describe to me your abduction, I pray you.
Oh, that's of no consequence just now, said Madame Bonacieux.
And what does it concern, then? My captivity?
I heard of it the day it happened, but as you were not guilty of any crime, as you were not guilty of any intrigue, as you, in short, knew nothing that could compromise yourself or anybody else, I attached no more importance to that event than it merited.
You speak very much at your ease, madame, said Bonacieux, hurt at the little interest his wife showed in him. Do you know that I was plunged during a day and night in a dungeon of the Bastille?
Oh, a day and a night soon pass away. Let us return to the object that brings me here.
What, that which brings you home to me? Is it not the desire of seeing a husband again from whom you have been separated for a week? Asked the mercer, piqued to the quick.
Yes, that first, and other things afterward.
Speak.
It is a thing of the highest interest, and upon which our future fortune perhaps depends.
The complexion of our fortune has changed very much since I saw you, Madame Bonacieux, and I should not be astonished if in the course of a few months it were to excite the envy of many folks.
Yes, particularly if you follow the instructions I am about to give you.
Me?
Yes, you. There is good and holy action to be performed, monsieur, and much money to be gained at the same time.
Madame Bonacieux knew that in talking of money to her husband, she took him on his weak side. But a man, were he even a mercer, when he had talked for 10 minutes with Cardinal Richelieu, is no longer the same man. Much money to be gained? Said Bonacieux, protruding his lip.
Yes, much.
About how much?
1,000 pistoles, perhaps.
What you demand of me is serious, then?
It is indeed.
What must be done?
You must go away immediately. I will give you a paper which you must not part with on any account, and which you will deliver into the proper hands.
And whither am I to go?
To London.
Ha! I go to London? Go to! You jest. I have no business in London.
But others wish that you should go there.
But who are those others? I warn you that I will never again work in the dark, and that I will know not only to what I expose myself, but for whom I expose myself.
An illustrious person sends you. An illustrious person awaits you. The recompense will exceed your expectations. That is all I promise you.
More intrigues. Nothing but intrigues. Thank you, madame. I am aware of them now. Monsieur Cardinal has enlightened me on that head.
The Cardinal? Cried Madame Bonacieux. Have you seen the Cardinal?
He sent for me, answered the mercer proudly.
And you responded to his bidding, you imprudent man?
Well, I can't say I had much choice of going or not going, for I was taken to him between two guards. It is true also that as I did not then know his eminence, if I had been able to dispense with the visit, I should have been enchanted.
He ill-treated you, then? He threatened you?
He gave me his hand and called me his friend. His friend! Do you hear that, madame? I am the friend of the great cardinal.
Of the great cardinal?
Perhaps you would contest his right to that title, madame?
I would contest nothing, but I tell you that the favour of a minister is ephemeral, and that a man must be mad to attach himself to a minister. There are powers above his which do not depend upon a man or the issue of an event. It is to these powers we should rally.
I am sorry for it, madame, but I acknowledge no other power but that of the great man whom I have the honour to serve.
You serve the cardinal?
Yes, madame, and as his servant, I will not allow you to be concerned in plots against the safety of the state, or to serve the intrigues of a woman who is not French and who has a Spanish heart. Fortunately, we have the great cardinal. His vigilant eye watches over and penetrates to the bottom of the heart. Bonacieux was repeating, word for word, a sentence which he had heard from the Comte de Rochefort. But the poor wife, who had reckoned on her husband, and who, in that hope, had answered for him to the queen, did not tremble the less, both at the danger into which she had nearly cast herself and at the helpless state to which she was reduced. Nevertheless, knowing the weakness of her husband, and more particularly his cupidity, she did not despair of bringing him round to her purpose.
Ah, you are a cardinalist, then, monsieur, are you? Cried she. And you serve the party of those who maltreat your wife and insult your queen?
Private interests are as nothing before the interests of all. I am for those who save the state, said Bonacieux emphatically.
And what do you know about the state you talk of? Said Madame Bonacieux, shrugging her shoulders. Be satisfied with being a plain, straightforward citizen, and turn to that side which offers the most advantages.
Eh, eh, said Bonacieux, slapping a plump, round bag, which returned a sound of money. What do you think of this, Madame Preacher?
Whence comes that money?
You do not guess?
From the cardinal?
From him, and from my friend the Comte de Rochefort.
The Comte de Rochefort? Why, it was he who carried me off.
That may be, madame.
And you received silver from that man?
Have you not said that that abduction was entirely political?
Yes, but that abduction had for its object the betrayal of my mistress, to draw from me by torture confessions that might compromise the honour and perhaps the life of my august mistress.
Madame, replied Bonacieux, your august mistress is a perfidious Spaniard, and what the cardinal does is well done.
Monsieur, said the young woman, I know you to be cowardly, avaricious, and foolish, but I never till now believed you infamous.
Madame, said Bonacieux, who had never seen his wife in a passion, and who recoiled before this conjugal anger. Madame, what do you say?
I say you are a miserable creature, continued Madame Bonacieux, who saw she was regaining some little influence over her husband. You meddle with politics, do you? And still more with cardinalist politics? Why, you sell yourself, body and soul, to the demon, the devil, for money.
No, to the cardinal.
It's the same thing, cried the young woman. Who calls Richelieu calls Satan.
Hold your tongue, madame. You may be overheard.
Yes, you are right. I should be ashamed for anyone to know your baseness.
And what do you require of me, then? Let us see.
I have told you. You must depart instantly, monsieur. You must accomplish loyally the commission with which I deign to charge you, and on that condition I pardon everything, I forget everything, and what is more, and she held out her hand to him, I restore my love.
Bonacieux was cowardly and avaricious, but he loved his wife. He was softened. A man of 50 cannot long bear malice with a wife of 23. Madame Bonacieux saw that he hesitated.
Come, have you decided? Said she.
But, my dear love, reflect a little upon what you require of me. London is far from Paris, very far, and perhaps the commission with which you charge me is not without dangers?
What matters it if you avoid them?
Hold, Madame Bonacieux, said the mercer. Hold! I positively refuse. Intrigues terrify me. I have seen the Bastille. My, that's a frightful place, that Bastille.
Only to think of it makes my flesh crawl. They threatened me with torture. Do you know what torture is? Wooden points that they stick in between your legs till your bones stick out. No, positively, I will not go. And, morbleu, why do you not go yourself? For in truth, I think I have hitherto been deceived in you. I really believe you are a man, and a violent one, too. And you are a woman, a miserable woman, stupid and brutal. You are afraid, are you? Well, if you do not go this very instant, I will have you arrested by the Queen's orders, and I will have you placed in the Bastille, which you dread so much.
Bonacieux fell into a profound reflection. He weighed the two angers in his brain, that of the cardinal and that of the queen. That of the cardinal predominated enormously.
"Have me arrested on the part of the queen," said he, "and I will appeal to his Eminence."
At once Madame Bonacieux saw that she had gone too far, and she was terrified at having communicated so much. She for a moment contemplated with fright that stupid countenance, impressed with the invincible resolution of a fool that is overcome by fear.
"Well, be it so," said she. "Perhaps, when all is considered, you are right. In the long run, a man knows more about politics than a woman, particularly such as, like you, Monsieur Bonacieux, have conversed with the cardinal. And yet it is very hard," added she, "that a man upon whose affection I thought I might depend treats me thus unkindly and will not comply with any of my fancies." "That is because your fancies go too far," replied the triumphant Bonacieux, "and I mistrust them." "Well, I will give it up, then," said the young woman, sighing. "It is well as it is. Say no more about it."
"At least you should tell me what I should have to do in London," replied Bonacieux, who remembered a little too late that Rochefort had desired him to endeavour to obtain his wife's secrets.
"It is of no use for you to know anything about it," said the young woman, whom an instinctive mistrust now impelled to draw back. "It was about one of those purchases that interest women, a purchase by which much might have been gained." But the more the young woman excused herself, the more important Bonacieux thought the secret which she declined to confide to him. He resolved then to hasten immediately to the residence of the Comte de Rochefort, and tell him that the queen was seeking for a messenger to send to London. "Pardon me for quitting you, my dear Madame Bonacieux," said he, "but, not knowing you would come to see me, I had made an engagement with a friend. I shall soon return, and if you will wait only a few minutes for me, as soon as I have concluded my business with that friend, as it is growing late, I will come back and reconduct you to the Louvre." "Thank you, monsieur. You are not brave enough to be of any use to me whatever," replied Madame Bonacieux. "I shall return very safely to the Louvre, all alone." "As you please, Madame Bonacieux," said the ex-mercer. "Shall I see you again soon?" "Next week I hope my duties will afford me a little liberty, and I will take advantage of it to come and put things in order here, as they must necessarily be much deranged." "Very well, I shall expect you. You are not angry with me?" "Not the least in the world." "Till then, then?" "Till then." Bonacieux kissed his wife's hand, and set off at a quick pace. "Well," said Madame Bonacieux, when her husband had shut the street door, and she found herself alone, "that imbecile lacked but one thing to become a cardinalist, and I, who have answered for him to the queen, I, who have promised my poor mistress. Ah, my God, my God! She will take me for one of those wretches with whom the palace swarms, and who are placed about her as spies. Ah, Monsieur Bonacieux, I never did love you much, but now it is worse than ever. I hate you, and on my word you shall pay for this."
At the moment she spoke these words, a rap on the ceiling made her raise her head, and a voice which reached her through the ceiling cried, "Dear Madame Bonacieux, open for me the little door on the alley, and I will come down to you." End of chapter. Chapter 18 of The Three Musketeers. Lover and Husband. "Ah, madame," said D'Artagnan, entering by the door which the young woman opened for him, "allow me to tell you that you have a bad sort of a husband." "You have, then, overheard our conversation?" asked Madame Bonacieux eagerly, and looking at D'Artagnan with disquiet. "The whole." "But how, my God?" "By a mode of proceeding known to myself, and by which I likewise overheard the more animated conversation which he had with the cardinal's police." "And what did you understand by what we said?" "A thousand things. In the first place, that, unfortunately, your husband is a simpleton and a fool. In the next place, you are in trouble, of which I am very glad, as it gives me an opportunity of placing myself at your service, and God knows I am ready to throw myself into the fire for you. Finally, that the queen wants a brave, intelligent, devoted man to make a journey to London for her. I have at least two of the three qualities you stand in need of, and here I am." Madame Bonacieux made no reply, but her heart beat with joy, and secret hope shone in her eyes. "And what guarantee will you give me," asked she, "if I consent to confide this message to you?" "My love for you. Speak, command. What is to be done?" My God," murmured the young woman. "Ought I to confide such a secret to you, monsieur? You are almost a boy." "I see that you require someone to answer for me." "I admit that would reassure me greatly." "Do you know Athos?" "No." "Porthos?" "No." "Aramis?" "No. Who are these gentlemen?" "Three of the king's musketeers. Do you know Monsieur de Tréville, their captain?" "Oh, yes, him. I know him. Not personally, but from having heard the queen speak of him more than once as a brave and loyal gentleman." "You do not fear lest he should betray you to the cardinal?" "Oh, no, certainly not." "Well, reveal your secret to him, and ask him whether, however important, however valuable, however terrible it may be, you may not confide it to me." "But this secret is not mine, and I cannot reveal it in this manner." "You were about to confide it to Monsieur Bonacieux," said D'Artagnan with chagrin. "As one confides a letter to the hollow of a tree, to the wing of a pigeon, to the collar of a dog." "And yet you see plainly that I love you." "You say so." "I am an honourable man." "You say so." "I am a gallant fellow." "I believe it." "I am brave." "Oh, I am sure of that."
"Then put me to the proof."
Madame Bonacieux looked at the young man, restrained for a minute by a last hesitation, but there was such an ardour in his eyes, such persuasion in his voice, that she felt herself constrained to confide in him. Besides, she found herself in circumstances where everything must be risked for the sake of everything. The queen might be as much injured by too much reticence as by too much confidence, and, let us admit it, the involuntary sentiment which she felt for her young protector decided her to speak. "Listen," said she. "I yield to your protestations, I yield to your assurances, but I swear to you, before God who hears us, that if you betray me and my enemies pardon me, I will kill myself while accusing you of my death."
"And I swear to you before God, madame," said D'Artagnan, "that if I am taken while accomplishing the orders you give me, I will die sooner than do anything that may compromise anyone."
Then the young woman confided in him the terrible secret of which chance had already communicated to him a part in front of the Samaritaine. This was their mutual declaration of love. D'Artagnan was radiant with joy and pride. This secret which he possessed, this woman whom he loved, Confidence and love made him a giant. "I go," said he. "I go at once." "How, you will go?" said Madame Bonacieux. "And your regiment, your captain?" "By my soul, you have made me forget all that, dear Constance. Yes, you are right. A furlough is needful." "Still another obstacle," murmured Madame Bonacieux sorrowfully. "As to that," cried D'Artagnan, after a moment of reflection, "I shall surmount it, be assured." "How so?" "I will go this very evening to Tréville, whom I will request to ask this favour for me of his brother in law, Monsieur Dessessart." "But another thing." "What?" asked D'Artagnan, seeing that Madame Bonacieux hesitated to continue. "You have perhaps no money?" "Perhaps is too much," said D'Artagnan, smiling. "Then," replied Madame Bonacieux, opening a cupboard and taking from it the very bag which a half hour before her husband had caressed so affectionately, "take this bag." "The cardinal's!" cried D'Artagnan, breaking into a loud laugh, he having heard, as may be remembered, thanks to the broken boards, every syllable of the conversation between the mercer and his wife. "The cardinal's," replied Madame Bonacieux. "You see, it makes a very respectable appearance." "Pardieu!" cried D'Artagnan, "it will be a double amusing affair to save the queen with the cardinal's money." "You are an amiable and charming young man," said Madame Bonacieux. "Be assured you will not find her majesty ungrateful." "Oh, I am already grandly recompensed!" cried D'Artagnan. "I love you. You permit me to tell you that I do. That is already more happiness than I dared to hope." "Silence!" said Madame Bonacieux, starting. "What?" "Someone is talking in the street." "It is the voice of my husband. Yes, I recognize it." D'Artagnan ran to the door and pushed the bolt. "He shall not come in before I am gone," said he, "and when I am gone, you can open to him." "But I ought to be gone too. And the disappearance of his money, how am I to justify it if I am here?" "You're right. We must go out." "Go out? How? He will see us if we go out." "Then you must come up into my room." "Ah," said Madame Bonacieux, "you speak that in a tone that frightens me." Madame Bonacieux pronounced these words with tears in her eyes. D'Artagnan saw those tears, and much disturbed, softened, he threw himself at her feet. "With me you will be as safe as in a temple. I give you my word of a gentleman." "Let us go," said she. "I place full confidence in you, my friend." D'Artagnan drew back the bolt with precaution, and both, light as shadows, glided through the interior door into the passage, ascended the stairs as quietly as possible, and entered D'Artagnan's chambers. Once there, for greater security, the young man barricaded the door. They both approached the window, and through a slit in the shutter they saw Bonacieux talking with a man in a cloak. At the sight of this man, D'Artagnan started, and half drawing his sword, sprang toward the door. It was the man of Meung. "What are you going to do?" cried Madame Bonacieux. "You will ruin us all." "But I have sworn to kill that man," said D'Artagnan. "Your life is devoted from this moment, and does not belong to you. In the name of the queen, I forbid you to throw yourself into any peril which is foreign to that of your journey." "And do you command nothing in your own name?" "In my name," said Madame Bonacieux, with great emotion, "in my name, I beg you. But listen, they appear to be speaking of me." D'Artagnan drew near the window and lent his ear. Monsieur Bonacieux had opened his door, and seeing the apartment, had returned to the man in the cloak, whom he had left alone for an instant. "She is gone," said he. "She must have returned to the Louvre." "You are sure," replied the stranger, "that she did not suspect the intentions with which you went out?" "No," replied Bonacieux, with a self-sufficient air. "She is too superficial a woman." "Is the young guardsman at home?" "I do not think he is. As you see, his shutter is closed, and you can see no light shine through the chinks of the shutters. All the same, it is well to be certain. How so? By knocking at his door. Go. I will ask his servant. Bonacieux re-entered the house, passed through the same door that had afforded a passage for the two fugitives, went up to D'Artagnan's door, and knocked. No one answered. Porthos, in order to make a greater display, had that evening borrowed Planchet. As to D'Artagnan, he took care not to give the least sign of existence. The moment the hand of Bonacieux sounded on the door, the two young people felt their hearts bound within them. "There is nobody within," said Bonacieux. "Never mind. Let us return to your apartment. We shall be safer there than in the doorway."
"Ah, my God!" whispered Mme. Bonacieux, "and we shall hear no more."
"On the contrary," said D'Artagnan, "we shall hear better." D'Artagnan raised the 3 or 4 boards which made his chamber another ear of Dionysius, spread a carpet on the floor, went upon his knees, and made a sign to Mme. Bonacieux to stoop, as he did, toward the opening. "You are sure there is nobody there?" said the stranger. "I will answer for it," said Bonacieux. "And you think that your wife has returned to the Louvre?" "Without speaking to anyone but yourself." "I am sure of it." "That is an important point. Do you understand?" "Then the news I brought you is of value?" "The greatest, my dear Bonacieux. I don't conceal this from you." "Then the cardinal will be pleased with me?" "I have no doubt of it." "The great cardinal!" "Are you sure, in her conversation with you, that your wife mentioned no names?" "I think not." "She did not name Madame de Chevreuse, the Duke of Buckingham, or Madame de Verney?" "No, she only told me she wished to send me to London to serve the interests of an illustrious personage."
"The traitor!" murmured Mme. Bonacieux.
"Silence!" said D'Artagnan, taking her hand, which, without thinking of it, she abandoned to him. "Never mind," continued the man in the cloak. "You were a fool not to have pretended to accept the mission. You would then be in present possession of the letter. The state, which is now threatened, would be safe, and you— And I? Well, you— The cardinal would have given you letters of nobility."
"Did he tell you so?"
"Yes, I know that he meant to afford you that agreeable surprise."
"Be satisfied," replied Bonacieux. "My wife adores me, and there is yet time."
"The ninny!"
murmured Mme. Bonacieux.
"Silence!"
said D'Artagnan, pressing her hand more closely. "How is there still time?" asked the man in the cloak.
"I go to the Louvre. I ask for Mme. Bonacieux. I say that I have reflected. I renew the affair. I obtain the letter, and I run directly to the cardinal."
"Well, go quickly. I will return soon to learn the result of your trip." The stranger went out.
"Infamous!"
said Mme. Bonacieux, addressing this epithet to her husband. "Silence!" said D'Artagnan, pressing her hand still more warmly. A terrible howling interrupted these reflections of D'Artagnan and Mme. Bonacieux. It was her husband, who had discovered the disappearance of the money bag and was crying, "Thieves!"
"Oh, my God!" cried Mme. Bonacieux. "He will rouse the whole quarter."
Bonacieux called a long time, but as such cries, on account of their frequency, brought nobody in the Rue des Fossoyeurs, and as lately the mercer's house had a bad name, finding that nobody came, he went out continuing to call, his voice being heard fainter and fainter as he went in the direction of the Rue de Bac.
"Now he is gone, it is your turn to get out," said Mme. Bonacieux. "Courage, my friend, but above all, prudence, and think what we owe to the queen."
"To her and to you," cried D'Artagnan. "Be satisfied, beautiful Constance. I shall become worthy of her gratitude. But shall I likewise return worthy of your love?"
The young woman only replied by the beautiful glow which mounted to her cheeks. A few seconds afterward, D'Artagnan also went out, enveloped in a large cloak, which ill concealed the sheath of a long sword. Madame Bonacieux followed him with her eyes, with that long, fond look with which he had turned the angle of the street. She fell on her knees, and clasping her hands, "Oh, my God!" cried she, "protect the queen, protect me!" End of chapter. Chapter 19 of The Three Musketeers. Plan of Campaign. D'Artagnan went straight to Monsieur de Tréville's. He had reflected that in a few minutes the cardinal would be warned by this cursed stranger, who appeared to be his agent, and he judged, with reason, he had not a moment to lose. The heart of the young man overflowed with joy. An opportunity presented itself to him in which there would be at the same time glory to be acquired and money to be gained, and as a far higher encouragement, it brought him into close intimacy with a woman he adored. This chance did, then, for him at once more than he would have dared to ask of Providence. Monsieur de Tréville was in his saloon with his habitual court of gentlemen. D'Artagnan, who was known as a familiar of the house, went straight to his office and sent word that he wished to see him on something of importance. D'Artagnan had been there scarcely 5 minutes when Monsieur de Tréville entered. At the first glance, and by the joy which was painted on his countenance, the worthy captain plainly perceived that something new was on foot. All the way along, D'Artagnan had been consulting with himself whether he should place confidence in Monsieur de Tréville, or whether he should only ask him to give him carte blanche for some secret affair. But Monsieur de Tréville had always been so thoroughly his friend, had always been so devoted to the king and queen, and hated the cardinal so cordially, that the young man resolved to tell him everything. "Did you ask for me, my good friend?" said Monsieur de Tréville. "Yes, monsieur," said D'Artagnan, lowering his voice. "And you will pardon me, I hope, for having disturbed you when you know the importance of my business." "Speak, then. I am all attention." "It concerns nothing less," said D'Artagnan, "than the honour, perhaps the life, of the queen." "What did you say?" asked Monsieur de Tréville, glancing round to see if they were surely alone, and then fixing his questioning look upon D'Artagnan. "I say, monsieur, that chance has rendered me master of a secret." "Which you will guard, I hope, young man, as your life." "But which I must impart to you, monsieur, for you alone can assist me in the mission I have just received from Her Majesty." "Is this secret your own?" "No, monsieur, it is Her Majesty's." "Are you authorized by Her Majesty to communicate it to me?" "No, monsieur, for on the contrary I am desired to preserve the profoundest mystery." "Why, then, are you about to betray it to me?" "Because, as I said, without you I can do nothing, and I am afraid you will refuse me the favour I come to ask if you do not know to what end I ask it." "Keep your secret, young man, and tell me what you wish." "I wish you to obtain for me, from Monsieur Dessessart, leave of absence for 15 days." "When?" "This very night." "You leave Paris?" "I am going on a mission." "May you tell me whither?" "To London." "Has any one an interest in preventing your arrival there?" "The cardinal, I believe, would give the world to prevent my success." "And you are going alone?" "I am going alone." "In that case you will not get beyond Bondy. I tell you so by the faith of de Tréville." "How so?" "You will be assassinated." "And I shall die in the performance of my duty." "But your mission will not be accomplished." "That is true," replied D'Artagnan. "Believe me," continued Tréville, "in enterprises of this kind, in order that one may arrive, four must set out." "Ah, you are right, monsieur," said D'Artagnan. "But you know Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, and you know if I can dispose of them." "Without confiding to them the secret which I am not willing to know?" "We are sworn, once for all, to implicit confidence and devotedness against all proof. Besides, you can tell them that you have full confidence in me, and they will not be more incredulous than you." I can send to each of them leave of absence for 15 days, that is all, to Athos, whose wound still makes him suffer, to go to the waters of Forges, to Porthos and Aramis to accompany their friend, whom they are not willing to abandon in such a painful condition. Sending their leave of absence will be proof enough that I authorize their journey.
Thanks, monsieur. You are 100 times too good.
Begone, then, find them instantly, and let all be done tonight. Ha! But first write your request to Dessessart. Perhaps you had a spy at your heels, and your visit, if it should ever be known to the cardinal, will thus seem legitimate.
D'Artagnan drew up his request, and Monsieur de Tréville, on receiving it, assured him that by 2 o'clock in the morning the 4 leaves of absence should be at the respective domiciles of the travellers. Have the goodness to send mine to Athos's residence. I should dread some disagreeable encounter if I were to go home.
Be easy. Adieu, and a prosperous voyage. Apropos,
said Monsieur de Tréville, calling him back.
D'Artagnan returned. Have you any money?
D'Artagnan tapped the bag he had in his pocket.
Enough?
Asked Monsieur de Tréville.
300 pistoles. Oh, plenty. That would carry you to the end of the world. Begone, then.
D'Artagnan saluted Monsieur de Tréville, who held out his hand to him. D'Artagnan pressed it with a respect mixed with gratitude. Since his first arrival at Paris, he had had constant occasion to honour this excellent man, whom he had always found worthy, loyal, and great. His first visit was to Aramis, at whose residence he had not been since the famous evening on which he had followed Madame Bonacieux. Still further, he had seldom seen the young Musketeer, but every time he had seen him, he had remarked a deep sadness imprinted on his countenance. This evening, especially, Aramis was melancholy and thoughtful. D'Artagnan asked some questions about this prolonged melancholy. Aramis pleaded as his excuse a commentary upon the 18th chapter of St. Augustine, which he was forced to write in Latin for the following week, and which preoccupied him a good deal. After the two friends had been chatting a few moments, a servant from Monsieur de Tréville entered, bringing a sealed packet.
"What is that?" asked Aramis.
"The leave of absence monsieur has asked for," replied the lackey.
"For me? I have asked for no leave of absence."
"Hold your tongue and take it," said D'Artagnan. "And you, my friend, there is a demi-pistole for your trouble. You will tell Monsieur de Tréville that Monsieur Aramis is very much obliged to him. Go." The lackey bowed to the ground and departed.
"What does all this mean?" asked Aramis.
"Pack up all you want for a journey of a fortnight and follow me."
"But I cannot leave Paris just now without knowing—"
Aramis stopped. "What has become of her? I suppose you mean," continued D'Artagnan.
"Become of whom?" asked Aramis.
"The woman who was here, the woman with the embroidered handkerchief."
"Who told you there was a woman here?" replied Aramis, becoming as pale as death.
"I saw her."
"And you know who she is?"
"I believe I can guess, at least."
"Listen," said Aramis. "Since you appear to know so many things, can you tell me what has become of that woman?"
"I presume that she has returned to Tours."
"To Tours? Yes, that may be. You evidently know her.
But why did she return to Tours without telling me anything?"
"Because she was in fear of being arrested." "Why has she not written to me, then?"
"Because she was afraid of compromising you."
"D'Artagnan, you restore me to life," cried Aramis. "I fancied myself despised, betrayed. I was so delighted to see her again. I could not have believed she would risk her liberty for me. And yet for what other cause could she have returned to Paris?" "For the cause which today takes us to England."
"And what is this cause?" demanded Aramis.
"Oh, you'll know it some day, Aramis, but at present I must imitate the discretion of the doctor's niece."
Aramis smiled as he remembered the tale he had told his friends on a certain evening.
Well, then, since she has left Paris, and you are sure of it, D'Artagnan, nothing prevents me, and I am ready to follow you. You say we are going to see Athos now, and if you will come thither, I beg you to make haste, for we have lost much time already. A propos, inform Bazin. Will Bazin go with us? Asked Aramis. Perhaps so. At all events, it is best that he should follow us to Athos's. Aramis called Bazin, and after having ordered him to join them at Athos's residence, said, "Let us go, then," at the same time taking his cloak, sword, and 3 pistols, opening uselessly 2 or 3 drawers to see if he could not find stray coin. When well assured this search was superfluous, he followed D'Artagnan, wondering to himself how this young guardsman should know so well who the lady was to whom he had given hospitality, and that he should know better than himself what had become of her. Only as they went out, Aramis placed his hand upon the arm of D'Artagnan, and looking at him earnestly, "You have not spoken of this lady," said he, "to nobody in the world, not even to Athos or Porthos. I have not breathed a syllable to them. Good enough." Tranquil on this important point, Aramis continued his way with D'Artagnan, and both soon arrived at Athos's dwelling. They found him holding his leave of absence in one hand and Monsieur de Tréville's note in the other. "Can you explain to me what signify this leave of absence and this letter, which I have just received?" said the astonished Athos. "My dear Athos, I wish, as your health absolutely requires it, that you should rest for a fortnight. Go, then, and take the waters of Forges, or any that may be more agreeable to you, and recuperate yourself as quickly as possible. Yours affectionately, de Tréville." "Well, this leave of absence and that letter mean that you must follow me, Athos." "To the water of Forges?" "There or elsewhere." "In the king's service?" "Either the king's or the queen's. Are we not their majesties' servants?" At that moment Porthos entered. "Pardieu!" said he, "here is a strange thing. Since when, I wonder, in the Musketeers, did they grant men leave of absence without their asking for it?" "Since," said D'Artagnan, "they have friends who ask it for them." "Ah, ah!" said Porthos. "It appears there's something fresh here." "Yes, we are going," said Aramis. "To what country?" demanded Porthos. "My faith, I don't know much about it," said Athos. "Ask D'Artagnan." "To London, gentlemen," said D'Artagnan. "To London!" cried Porthos. "And what the devil are we going to do in London?" "That is what I am not at liberty to tell you, gentlemen. You must trust to me." "But in order to go to London," added Porthos, "money is needed, and I have none." "Nor I," said Aramis. "Nor I," said Athos. "I have," replied D'Artagnan, pulling out his treasure from his pocket and placing it on the table. "There are in this bag 300 pistoles. Let us each take 75. That is enough to take us to London and back. Besides, make yourselves easy. We shall not all arrive at London." "Why so?" "Because, in all probability, some one of us will be left on the road." "Is this, then, a campaign upon which we are now entering?" "One of a most dangerous kind, I give you notice." "Ah, but if we do risk being killed," said Porthos, "at least I should like to know what for." "You would be all the wiser," said Athos. "And yet," said Aramis, "I am somewhat of Porthos's opinion." "Is the king accustomed to give you such reasons? No. He says to you jauntily, 'Gentlemen, there is fighting going on in Gascony or in Flanders, go and fight.' And you go there. Why? You need give yourselves no more uneasiness about this." "D'Artagnan is right," said Athos. "Here are our 3 leaves of absence which come from Monsieur de Tréville, and here are 300 pistoles which came from I don't know where. So let us go and get killed where we are told to go.
Is life worth the trouble of so many questions? D'Artagnan, I am ready to follow you." "And I also," said Porthos. "And I also," said Aramis. "And indeed, I am not sorry to quit Paris. I had need of distraction." "Well, you will have distractions enough, gentlemen, be assured," said D'Artagnan. "And now, when are we to go?" asked Athos. "Immediately," replied D'Artagnan. "We have not a minute to lose." "Hello, Grimaud, Planchet, Mousqueton, Bazin!" cried the four young men, calling their lackeys. "Clean my boots, and fetch the horses from the hotel." Each musketeer was accustomed to leave at the general hotel, as at a barrack, his own horse and that of his lackey. Planchet, Grimaud, Mousqueton, and Bazin set off at full speed. "Now let us lay down the plan of campaign," said Porthos. "Where do we go first?" "To Calais," said D'Artagnan. "That is the most direct line to London." "Well," said Porthos, "this is my advice." "Speak." "Four men travelling together would be suspected. D'Artagnan will give each of us his instructions. I will go by the way of Boulogne to clear the way. Athos will set out 2 hours after by that of Amiens. Aramis will follow us by that of Noyon. As to D'Artagnan, he will go by what route he thinks best, in Planchet's clothes, while Planchet will follow us like D'Artagnan, in the uniform of the guards." "Gentlemen," said Athos, "my opinion is that it is not proper to allow lackeys to have anything to do in such an affair. A secret may, by chance, be betrayed by gentlemen, but is almost always sold by lackeys." "Porthos's plan appears to me to be impracticable," said D'Artagnan, "inasmuch as I am myself ignorant of what instructions I can give you. I am the bearer of a letter, that is all. I have not, and I cannot make 3 copies of that letter, because it is sealed. We must, then, as it appears to me, travel in company. This letter is here, in my pocket," and he pointed to the pocket which contained the letter. "If I should be killed, one of you must take it and continue the route. If he be killed, it will be another's turn, and so on. Provided a single one arrives, that is all that is required." "Bravo, D'Artagnan, your opinion is mine," cried Athos. "Besides, we must be consistent. I am going to take the waters; you will accompany me. Instead of taking the water of Forges, I go and take sea waters. I am free to do so. If anyone wishes to stop us, I will show Monsieur de Tréville's letter, and you will show your leaves of absence. If we are attacked, we will defend ourselves. If we are tried, we will stoutly maintain that we were only anxious to dip ourselves a certain number of times in the sea. They would have an easy bargain of 4 isolated men, whereas 4 men together make a troop. We will arm our 4 lackeys with pistols and musketoons. If they send an army out against us, we will give battle, and the survivor, as D'Artagnan says, will carry the letter." "Well said," cried Aramis. "You don't often speak, Athos, but when you do speak, it is like St. John of the Golden Mouth. I agree to Athos's plan. And you, Porthos?" "I agree to it too," said Porthos, "if D'Artagnan approves of it. D'Artagnan, being the bearer of the letter, is naturally the head of the enterprise. Let him decide, and we will execute." "Well," said D'Artagnan, "I decide that we should adopt Athos's plan, and that we set off in half an hour." "Agreed!" shouted the 3 Musketeers in chorus. Each one, stretching out his hand to the bag, took his 75 pistoles and made his preparations to set out at the time appointed. End of chapter. Chapter 20 of The 3 Musketeers. The Journey. At 2 o'clock in the morning, our 4 adventurers left Paris by the Barrière Saint Denis. As long as it was dark, they remained silent. In spite of themselves, they submitted to the influence of the obscurity and apprehended ambushes on every side. With the first rays of day, their tongues were loosened. With the sun, gaiety revived. It was like the eve of a battle. The heart beat, the eyes laughed,
and they felt that the life they were perhaps going to lose was, after all, a good thing. Besides, the appearance of the caravan was formidable. The black horses of the Musketeers, their martial carriage, with the regimental step of these noble companions of the soldier, would have betrayed the most strict incognito. The lackeys followed, armed to the teeth. All went well till they arrived at Chantilly, which they reached about 8 o'clock in the morning. They needed breakfast, and alighted at the door of an auberge, recommended by a sign representing St. Martin giving half his cloak to a poor man. They ordered the lackeys not to unsaddle the horses, and to hold themselves in readiness to set off again immediately. They entered the common hall and placed themselves at table. A gentleman, who had just arrived by the route of Dammartin, was seated at the same table and was breakfasting. He opened the conversation about rain and fine weather. The travellers replied. He drank to their good health, and the travellers returned his politeness. But at the moment Mousqueton came to announce that the horses were ready, and they were arising from table, the stranger proposed to Porthos to drink the health of the cardinal. Porthos replied that he asked no better if the stranger, in his turn, would drink to the health of the king. The stranger cried that he acknowledged no other king but his Eminence. Porthos called him drunk, and the stranger drew his sword. "You have committed a piece of folly," said Athos, "but it can't be helped. There is no drawing back. Kill the fellow and rejoin us as soon as you can." All three remounted their horses and set out at a good pace, while Porthos was promising his adversary to perforate him with all the thrusts known in the fencing schools. "There goes one," cried Athos at the end of 500 paces. "But why did that man attack Porthos rather than any other one of us?" asked Aramis. "Because Porthos was talking louder than the rest of us, he took him for the chief," said D'Artagnan. "I always said that this cadet from Gascony was a well of wisdom," murmured Athos, and the travellers continued their route. At Beauvais they stopped 2 hours, as well to breathe their horses a little as to wait for Porthos. At the end of 2 hours, as Porthos did not come, nor any news of him, they resumed their journey. At a league from Beauvais, where the road was confined between two high banks, they fell in with 8 or 10 men who, taking advantage of the road being unpaved in this spot, appeared to be employed in digging holes and filling up the ruts with mud. Aramis, not liking to soil his boots with this artificial mortar, apostrophized them rather sharply. Athos wished to restrain him, but it was too late. The labourers began to jeer the travellers, and by their insolence disturbed the equanimity even of the cool Athos, who urged on his horse against one of them. Then each of these men retreated as far as the ditch, from which each took a concealed musket. The result was that our 7 travellers were outnumbered in weapons. Aramis received a ball which passed through his shoulder, and Mousqueton another ball which lodged in the fleshy part which prolongs the lower portion of the loins. Therefore Mousqueton alone fell from his horse, not because he was severely wounded, but not being able to see the wound, he judged it to be more serious than it really was. "It was an ambuscade!" shouted D'Artagnan. "Don't waste a charge! Forward!" Aramis, wounded as he was, seized the mane of his horse, which carried him on with the others. Mousqueton's horse rejoined them, and galloped by the side of his companions. "That will serve us for a relay," said Athos. "I would rather have had a hat," said D'Artagnan. "Mine was carried away by a ball. By my faith, it is very fortunate that the letter was not in it." "They'll kill poor Porthos when he comes up," said Aramis. "If Porthos were on his legs, he would have rejoined us by this time," said Athos. "My opinion is that on the ground the drunken man was not intoxicated." They continued at their best speed for 2 hours, although the horses were so fatigued that it was to be feared they would soon refuse service. The travellers had chosen crossroads in the hope that they might meet with less interruption, but at Crèvecoeur, Aramis declared he could proceed no further. In fact, he required all the courage which he concealed beneath his elegant form and polished manners to bear him so far. He grew more pale every minute, and they were obliged to support him on his horse. They lifted him off at the door of a cabaret, left Bazin with him, who, besides, in a skirmish was more embarrassing than useful, and set forward again in the hope of sleeping at Amiens. Morbleu, said Athos, as soon as they were again in motion. Reduced to two masters and Grimaud and Planchet. Morbleu! I won't be their dupe, I will answer for it. I will neither open my mouth nor draw my sword between this and Calais. I swear by— Don't waste time in swearing, said D'Artagnan. Let us gallop, if our horses will consent. And the travellers buried their rowels in the horses' flanks, who, thus vigorously stimulated, recovered their energies. They arrived at Amiens at midnight and alighted at the auberge of the Golden Lily. The host had the appearance of as honest a man as any on earth. He received the travellers with his candlestick in one hand and his cotton nightcap in the other. He wished to lodge the two travellers each in a charming chamber, but unfortunately these charming chambers were at the opposite extremities of the hotel. D'Artagnan and Athos refused them. The host replied that he had no other worthy of their excellencies, but the travellers declared they would sleep in the common chamber, each on a mattress which might be thrown upon the ground. The host insisted, but the travellers were firm, and he was obliged to do as they wished. They had just prepared their beds and barricaded the door within, when someone knocked at the yard shutter. They demanded who was there, and recognizing the voices of their lackeys, opened the shutter. It was indeed Planchet and Grimaud. Grimaud can take care of the horses, said Planchet. If you are willing, gentlemen, I will sleep across your doorway, and you will then be certain that nobody can reach you. And on what will you sleep? Said D'Artagnan. Here is my bed, replied Planchet, producing a bundle of straw. Come, then, said D'Artagnan. You are right. Mine host's face does not please me at all. It is too gracious. Nor me either, said Athos. Planchet mounted by the window and installed himself across the doorway, while Grimaud went and shut himself up in the stable, undertaking that by 5 o'clock in the morning he and the 4 horses should be ready. The night was quiet enough. Toward 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody endeavoured to open the door, but as Planchet awoke in an instant and cried, "Who goes there?" somebody replied that he was mistaken, and went away. At 4 o'clock in the morning they heard a terrible riot in the stables. Grimaud had tried to waken the stable boys, and the stable boys had beaten him. When they opened the window, they saw the poor lad lying senseless, with his head split by a blow with a pitchfork. Planchet went down into the yard and wished to saddle the horses, but the horses were all used up. Mousqueton's horse, which had travelled for 5 or 6 hours without a rider the day before, might have been able to pursue the journey, but by an inconceivable error the veterinary surgeon, who had been sent for, as it appeared, to bleed one of the host's horses, had bled Mousqueton's. This began to be annoying. All these successive accidents were perhaps the result of chance, but they might be the fruits of a plot. Athos and D'Artagnan went out, while Planchet was sent to inquire if there were not 3 horses for sale in the neighbourhood. At the door stood 2 horses, fresh, strong, and fully equipped. These would just have suited them. He asked where their masters were, and was informed that they had passed the night in the inn, and were then settling their bill with the host. Athos went down to pay the reckoning, while D'Artagnan and Planchet stood at the street door. The host was in a lower and back room, to which Athos was requested to go. Athos entered without the least mistrust, and took out 2 pistoles to pay the bill. The host was alone, seated before his desk, one of the drawers of which was partly open. He took the money which Athos offered to him, and after turning and turning it over and over in his hands, suddenly cried out that it was bad, and that he would have him and his companions arrested as forgers. "You blackguard!" cried Athos, going for him. "I'll cut your ears off." At the same instant 4 men, armed to the teeth, entered by side doors and rushed upon Athos. "I am taken!" shouted Athos, with all the power of his lungs.
Go on, D'Artagnan! Spur! Spur! And he fired 2 pistols.
D'Artagnan and Planchet did not require twice bidding. They unfastened the 2 horses that were waiting at the door, leaped upon them, buried their spurs in their sides, and set off at full gallop. "Do you know what has become of Athos?" asked D'Artagnan of Planchet as they galloped on. "Ah, monsieur," said Planchet, "I saw one fall at each of his 2 shots, and he appeared to me, through the glass door, to be fighting with his sword with the others." "Brave Athos," murmured D'Artagnan, "and to think that we are compelled to leave him. Maybe the same fate awaits us 2 paces hence. Forward, Planchet, forward! You are a brave fellow." "As I told you, monsieur," replied Planchet, "Picards are found out by being used. Besides, I am here in my own country, and that excites me." And both, with free use of the spur, arrived at St. Omer without drawing bit. At St. Omer they breathed their horses with the bridles passed under their arms, for fear of accident, and ate a morsel from their hands on the stones of the street, after they departed again. At 100 paces from the gates of Calais, D'Artagnan's horse gave out, and could not by any means be made to get up again, the blood flowing from his eyes and his nose. There still remained Planchet's horse, but he stopped short and could not be made to move a step. Fortunately, as we have said, they were within 100 paces of the city. They left their 2 nags upon the highroad and ran toward the quay. Planchet called his master's attention to a gentleman who had just arrived with his lackey, and only preceded them by about 50 paces. They made all speed to come up to this gentleman, who appeared to be in great haste. His boots were covered with dust, and he inquired if he could not instantly cross over to England.
"Nothing would be more easy," said the captain of a vessel ready to set sail. "But this morning came an order to let no one leave without express permission from the cardinal." "I have that permission," said the gentleman, drawing the paper from his pocket. "Here it is." "Have it examined by the governor of the port," said the shipmaster, "and give me the preference." "Where shall I find the governor?" "At his country house. And that is situated?" "At a quarter of a league from the city. Look, you may see it from here, at the foot of that little hill, that slated roof." "Very well," said the gentleman, and, with his lackey, he took the road to the governor's country house. D'Artagnan and Planchet followed the gentleman at a distance of 500 paces. Once outside the city, D'Artagnan overtook the gentleman as he was entering a little wood. "Monsieur, you appear to be in great haste?" "No one can be more so, monsieur." "I am sorry for that," said D'Artagnan, "for as I am in great haste likewise, I wish to beg you to render me a service." "What?" "To let me sail first." "That's impossible," said the gentleman. "I have travelled 60 leagues in 40 hours, and by tomorrow at midday I must be in London." "I have performed that same distance in 40 hours, and by 10 o'clock in the morning I must be in London." "Very sorry, monsieur, but I was here first, and will not sail second." "I am sorry, too, monsieur, but I arrived second and must sail first." "The king's service," said the gentleman. "My own service," said D'Artagnan. "But this is a needless quarrel you seek with me, as it seems to me. Parbleu, what do you desire it to be?" "What do you want?" "Would you like to know?" "Certainly." "Well, then, I wish that order of which you are bearer, seeing that I have not one of my own and must have one." "You jest, I presume." "I never jest." "Let me pass." "You shall not pass." "My brave young man, I will blow out your brains. Hola, Lubin, my pistols!" "Planchet," called out D'Artagnan, "take care of the lackey. I will manage the master." Planchet, emboldened by the first exploit, sprang upon Lubin, and being strong and vigorous, he soon got him on the broad of his back and placed his knee upon his breast. "Go on with your affair, monsieur," cried Planchet. "I have finished mine." Seeing this, the gentleman drew his sword and sprang upon D'Artagnan. But he had too strong an adversary.
In 3 seconds, D'Artagnan had wounded him 3 times, exclaiming at each thrust, "One for Athos, one for Porthos, and one for Aramis." At the third hit, the gentleman fell like a log. D'Artagnan believed him to be dead, or at least insensible, and went toward him for the purpose of taking the order. But the moment he extended his hand to search for it, the wounded man, who had not dropped his sword, plunged the point into D'Artagnan's breast, crying, "One for you!" "And one for me, the best for last," cried D'Artagnan, furious, nailing him to the earth with a fourth thrust through his body. This time the gentleman closed his eyes and fainted. D'Artagnan searched his pockets and took from one of them the order for the passage. It was in the name of Comte de Ward. Then, casting a glance on the handsome young man, who was scarcely 25 years of age, and whom he was leaving in his gore, deprived of sense and perhaps dead, he gave a sigh for that unaccountable destiny which leads men to destroy each other for the interests of people who are strangers to them, and who often do not even know that they exist. But he was soon aroused from these reflections by Lubin, who uttered loud cries and screamed for help with all his might. Planchet grasped him by the throat and pressed as hard as he could. "Monsieur," said he, "as long as I hold him in this manner, he can't cry, I'll be bound. But as soon as I let go, he will howl again. I know him for a Norman, and Normans are obstinate." In fact, tightly held as he was, Lubin endeavoured still to cry out. "Stay," said D'Artagnan, and taking out his handkerchief, he gagged him. "Now," said Planchet, "let us bind him to a tree." This being properly done, they drew the Comte de Ward close to his servant, and as night was approaching, and as the wounded man and the bound man were at some little distance within the wood, it was evident they were likely to remain there till the next day. "And now," said D'Artagnan, "to the governor's." "But you are wounded, it seems," said Planchet. "Oh, that's nothing. Let us attend to what is more pressing first, and then we will attend to my wound. Besides, it does not seem very dangerous." And they both set forward as fast as they could toward the country house of the worthy functionary. The Comte de Ward was announced, and D'Artagnan was introduced. "You have an order signed by the cardinal?" said the governor. "Yes, monsieur," replied D'Artagnan. "Here it is." Ah, it is quite regular and explicit," said the governor. "Most likely," said D'Artagnan. "I am one of his most faithful servants." "It appears that his Eminence is anxious to prevent someone from crossing to England?" "Yes, a certain D'Artagnan, a Béarnese gentleman who left Paris in company with 3 of his friends, with the intention of going to London." "Do you know him personally?" asked the governor. "Whom?" "This D'Artagnan." "Perfectly well." "Describe him to me, then." "Nothing more easy." And D'Artagnan gave, feature for feature, a description of the Comte de Ward. "Is he accompanied?" "Yes, by a lackey named Lubin." "We will keep a sharp lookout for them, and if we lay hands on them, his Eminence may be assured they will be reconducted to Paris under a good escort." "And by doing so, Monsieur the Governor," said D'Artagnan, "you will deserve well of the cardinal." "Shall you see him on your return, Monsieur Count?" "Without a doubt." "Tell him, I beg you, that I am his humble servant." "I will not fail." Delighted with this assurance, the governor countersigned the passport and delivered it to D'Artagnan. D'Artagnan lost no time in useless compliments. He thanked the governor, bowed, and departed. Once outside, he and Planchet set off as fast as they could, and by making a long detour, avoided the wood and re-entered the city by another gate. The vessel was quite ready to sail, and the captain was waiting on the wharf. "Well," said he, on perceiving D'Artagnan. "Here is my pass countersigned," said the latter. "And that other gentleman?" "He will not go to-day," said D'Artagnan. "But here, I'll pay you for us too." "In that case, let us go," said the shipmaster. "Let us go. repeated D'Artagnan. He leaped with Planchet into the boat, and 5 minutes after they were on board. It was time, for they had scarcely sailed half a league, when D'Artagnan saw a flash and heard a detonation. It was the cannon which announced the closing of the port. He had now leisure to look to his wound. Fortunately, as D'Artagnan had thought, it was not dangerous. The point of the sword had touched a rib and glanced along the bone. Still further, his shirt had stuck to the wound, and he had lost only a few drops of blood. D'Artagnan was worn out with fatigue. A mattress was laid upon the deck for him. He threw himself upon it and fell asleep. On the morrow, at break of day, they were still 3 or 4 leagues from the coast of England. The breeze had been so light all night, they had made but little progress. At 10 o'clock the vessel cast anchor in the harbour of Dover, and at 10:30 D'Artagnan placed his foot on English land, crying, "Here I am at last!" But that was not all. They must get to London. In England the post was well served. D'Artagnan and Planchet took each a post horse, and a postilion rode before them. In a few hours they were in the capital. D'Artagnan did not know London. He did not know a word of English, but he wrote the name of Buckingham on a piece of paper, and everyone pointed out to him the way to the duke's hotel. The duke was at Windsor hunting with the king. D'Artagnan inquired for the confidential valet of the duke, who, having accompanied him in all his voyages, spoke French perfectly well. He told him that he came from Paris on an affair of life and death, and that he must speak with his master instantly. The confidence with which D'Artagnan spoke convinced Patrick, which was the name of this minister of the minister. He ordered 2 horses to be saddled, and himself went as guide to the young guardsman. As for Planchet, he had been lifted from his horse as stiff as a rush. The poor lad's strength was almost exhausted. D'Artagnan seemed iron. On their arrival at the castle, they learned that Buckingham and the king were hawking in the marshes 2 or 3 leagues away. In 20 minutes they were on the spot named. Patrick soon caught the sound of his master's voice calling his falcon. "Whom must I announce to my Lord Duke?" asked Patrick. "The young man who one evening sought a quarrel with him on the Pont Neuf, opposite the Samaritaine." "A singular introduction. You will find that it is good as another." Patrick galloped off, reached the duke, and announced to him in the terms directed that a messenger awaited him. Buckingham at once remembered the circumstance, and suspecting that something was going on in France of which it was necessary he should be informed, he only took the time to inquire where the messenger was, and recognizing from afar the uniform of the guards, he put his horse into a gallop, and rode straight up to D'Artagnan. Patrick discreetly kept in the background. "No misfortune has happened to the queen?" cried Buckingham, the instant he came up, throwing all his fear and love into the question. "I believe not. Nevertheless, I believe she runs some great peril from which your grace alone can extricate her." "Ay," cried Buckingham, "what is it? I should be too happy to be of any service to her. Speak, speak." "Take this letter," said D'Artagnan. "This letter? From whom comes this letter?" "From her Majesty, as I think." "From her Majesty," said Buckingham, becoming so pale that D'Artagnan feared he would faint as he broke the seal. "What is this rent?" said he, showing D'Artagnan a place where it had been pierced through. "Ah," said D'Artagnan, "I did not see that. It was the sword of the Comte de Ward that made that hole, when he gave me a good thrust in the breast." "You are wounded?" asked Buckingham, as he opened the letter. "Oh, nothing but a scratch," said D'Artagnan. "Just heaven, what have I read?" cried the duke. "Patrick, remain here, or rather join the king, wherever he may be, and tell his majesty that I humbly beg him to excuse me, but an affair of the greatest importance recalls me to London. Come, monsieur, come." And both set off towards the capital at full gallop. End of chapter. Chapter 21 of the Three Musketeers. The Countess de Winter. As they rode along, the duke endeavoured to draw from D'Artagnan not all that had happened, but what D'Artagnan himself knew. By adding all that he heard from the mouth of the young man to his own remembrances, he was enabled to form a pretty exact idea of a position of the seriousness of which, for the rest, the Queen's letter, short but explicit, gave him the clue. But that which astonished him most was that the cardinal, so deeply interested in preventing this young man from setting his foot in England, had not succeeded in arresting him on the road. It was, then, upon the manifestation of this astonishment that D'Artagnan related to him the precaution taken, and how, thanks to the devotion of his three friends, whom he had left scattered and bleeding on the road, he had succeeded in coming off with a single sword thrust, which had pierced the Queen's letter, and for which he had repaid Monsieur de Wardes with such terrible coin. While he was listening to this recital, delivered with the greatest simplicity, the duke looked from time to time at the young man with astonishment, as if he could not comprehend how so much prudence, courage, and devotedness could be allied with a countenance which indicated not more than 20 years. The horses went like the wind, and in a few minutes they were at the gates of London. D'Artagnan imagined that on arriving in town the duke would slacken his pace, but it was not so. He kept on his way at the same rate, heedless about upsetting those whom he met on the road. In fact, in crossing the city, 2 or 3 accidents of this kind happened, but Buckingham did not even turn his head to see what became of those he had knocked down. D'Artagnan followed him amid cries which strongly resembled curses. On entering the court of his hotel, Buckingham sprang from his horse, and without thinking what became of the animal, threw the bridle on his neck and sprang toward the vestibule. D'Artagnan did the same, with a little more concern, however, for the noble creatures, whose merits he fully appreciated. But he had the satisfaction of seeing 3 or 4 grooms run from the kitchens and the stables and busy themselves with the steeds. The duke walked so fast that D'Artagnan had some trouble in keeping up with him. He passed through several apartments, of an elegance of which even the greatest nobles of France had not even an idea, and arrived at length in a bedchamber which was at once a miracle of taste and of richness. In the alcove of this chamber was a door concealed in the tapestry, which the duke opened with a little gold key, which he wore suspended from his neck by a chain of the same metal. With discretion D'Artagnan remained behind, but at the moment when Buckingham crossed the threshold, he turned round, and seeing the hesitation of the young man, "Come in," cried he, "and if you have the good fortune to be admitted to her Majesty's presence, tell her what you have seen." Encouraged by this invitation, D'Artagnan followed the duke, who closed the door after them. The two found themselves in a small chapel covered with a tapestry of Persian silk worked with gold, and brilliantly lighted with a vast number of candles. Over a species of altar, and beneath a canopy of blue velvet, surmounted by white and red plumes, was a full-length portrait of Anne of Austria, so perfect in its resemblance that D'Artagnan uttered a cry of surprise on beholding it. One might believe the queen was about to speak. On the altar, and beneath the portrait, was the casket containing the diamond studs. The duke approached the altar, knelt as a priest might have done before a crucifix, and opened the casket. "There," said he, drawing from the casket a large bow of blue ribbon all sparkling with diamonds, "there are the precious studs which I have taken an oath should be buried with me. The queen gave them to me; the queen requires them again. Her will be done, like that of God, in all things." Then he began to kiss, one after the other, those dear studs with which he was about to part. All at once he uttered a terrible cry. "What is the matter?" cried D'Artagnan, anxiously. "What has happened to you, my lord?" "All is lost!" cried Buckingham, becoming as pale as a corpse. "2 of the studs are wanting. There are only 10. "Can you have lost them, my lord? Or do you think they have been stolen?" "They have been stolen," replied the duke, And it is the cardinal who has dealt this blow. Hold, see! The ribbons which held them have been cut with scissors.
If my lord suspects they have been stolen, perhaps the person who stole them still has them in his hands.
Wait, said the duke. The only time I have worn these studs was at a ball given by the king 8 days ago at Windsor. The Comtesse de Winter, with whom I had quarrelled, became reconciled to me at that ball. That reconciliation was nothing but the vengeance of a jealous woman. I have never seen her from that day. The woman is an agent of the cardinal.
He has agents, then, throughout the world? Cried D'Artagnan.
Oh, yes, said Buckingham, grating his teeth with rage. Yes, he is a terrible antagonist. But when is this ball to take place?
Monday next.
Monday next. Still 5 days before us. That's more time than we want. Patrick! Cried the duke, opening the door of the chapel. Patrick! His confidential valet appeared. My jeweller and my secretary. The valet went out with a mute promptitude which showed him accustomed to obey blindly and without reply. But although the jeweller had been mentioned first, it was the secretary who first made his appearance. This was simply because he lived in the hotel. He found Buckingham seated at a table in his bedchamber, writing orders with his own hand. Mr. Jackson, said he, go instantly to the Lord Chancellor, and tell him that I charge him with the execution of these orders. I wish them to be promulgated immediately.
But, my lord, if the Lord Chancellor interrogates me upon the motives which may have led your grace to adopt such an extraordinary measure, what shall I reply?
That such is my pleasure, and that I answer for my will to no man.
Will that be the answer? Replied the secretary, smiling, which he must transmit to his majesty, if by chance his majesty should have the curiosity to know why no vessel is to leave any of the ports of Great Britain?
You're right, Mr. Jackson, replied Buckingham. He will say, in that case, to the king that I am determined on war, and that this measure is my first act of hostility against France. The secretary bowed and retired. We are safe on that side, said Buckingham, turning toward D'Artagnan. If the studs are not yet gone to Paris, they will not arrive till after you.
How so?
I have just placed an embargo on all vessels at present in His Majesty's ports, and without particular permission, not one dare lift an anchor. D'Artagnan looked with stupefaction at a man who thus employed the unlimited power with which he was clothed by the confidence of a king in the prosecution of his intrigues. Buckingham saw by the expression of the young man's face what was passing in his mind, and he smiled. Yes, said he, yes, Anne of Austria is my true queen. Upon a word from her I would betray my country, I would betray my king, I would betray my God. She asked me not to send the Protestants of La Rochelle the assistance I promised them. I have not done so. I broke my word, it is true, but what signifies that? I obeyed my love, and have I not been richly paid for that obedience? It was to that obedience I owe her portrait. D'Artagnan was amazed to note by what fragile and unknown threads the destinies of nations and the lives of men are suspended. He was lost in these reflections when the goldsmith entered. He was an Irishman, one of the most skilful of his craft, and who himself confessed that he gained 100,000 livres a year by the Duke of Buckingham. Mr. O'Reilly, said the Duke, leading him into the chapel, look at these diamond studs and tell me what they are worth apiece. The goldsmith cast a glance at the elegant manner in which they were set, calculated, one with another, what the diamonds were worth, and without hesitation said, 1,500 pistoles each, my lord. How many days would it require to make 2 studs exactly like them? You see there are 2 wanting.
8 days, my lord.
I will give you 3,000 pistoles apiece if I can have them by the day after tomorrow."
"My lord, they shall be yours."
"You are a jewel of a man, Mr. O'Reilly, but that is not all. These studs cannot be trusted to anybody. It must be done in the palace."
"Impossible, my lord. There is no one but myself can so execute them that one cannot tell the new from the old."
"Therefore, my dear Mr. O'Reilly, you are my prisoner. And if you wish ever to leave my palace, you cannot. So make the best of it. Name to me such of your workmen as you need, and point out the tools they must bring." The goldsmith knew the duke. He knew all objection would be useless, and instantly determined how to act.
"May I be permitted to inform my wife?" said he.
"Oh, you may even see her if you like, my dear Mr. O'Reilly. Your captivity shall be mild, be assured. And as every inconvenience deserves its indemnification, here is, in addition to the price of the studs, an order for 1,000 pistoles, to make you forget the annoyance I cause you."
D'Artagnan could not get over the surprise created in him by this minister, who thus open-handed sported with men and millions. As to the goldsmith, he wrote to his wife, sending her the order for the 1,000 pistoles, and charging her to send him, in exchange, his most skilful apprentice, an assortment of diamonds, of which he gave the names and the weight, and the necessary tools. Buckingham conducted the goldsmith to the chamber destined for him, and which, at the end of half an hour, was transformed into a workshop. Then he placed a sentinel at each door, with an order to admit nobody upon any pretence but his valet de chambre, Patrick. We need not add that the goldsmith, O'Reilly, and his assistant were prohibited from going out under any pretext. This point settled, the duke turned to D'Artagnan.
"Now, my young friend," said he, "England is all our own. What do you wish for? What do you desire?"
"A bed, my lord," replied D'Artagnan. "At present, I confess, that is the thing I stand most in need of." Buckingham gave D'Artagnan a chamber adjoining his own. He wished to have the young man at hand. Not that he at all mistrusted him, but for the sake of having someone to whom he could constantly talk of the queen. In 1 hour after, the ordinance was published in London that no vessel bound for France should leave port, not even the packet boat with letters. In the eyes of everybody, this was a declaration of war between the two kingdoms. On the day after the morrow, by 11 o'clock, the 2 diamond studs were finished, and they were so completely imitated, so perfectly alike, that Buckingham could not tell the new ones from the old ones, and experts in such matters would have been deceived as he was. He immediately called D'Artagnan.
"Here," said he to him, "are the diamond studs that you came to bring, and be my witness that I have done all that human power could do."
"Be satisfied, my lord, I will tell all that I have seen. But does your grace mean to give me the studs without the casket?"
"The casket would encumber you. Besides, the casket is the more precious from being all that is left to me. You will say that I keep it."
"I will perform your commission, word for word, my lord."
"And now," resumed Buckingham, looking earnestly at the young man, "how shall I ever acquit myself of the debt I owe you?"
D'Artagnan blushed up to the whites of his eyes. He saw that the duke was searching for a means of making him accept something, and the idea that the blood of his friends and himself was about to be paid for with English gold was strangely repugnant to him. "Let us understand each other, my lord," replied D'Artagnan, "and let us make things clear beforehand, in order that there may be no mistake. I am in the service of the King and Queen of France, and form part of the company of Monsieur Dessessart, who, as well as his brother-in-law, Monsieur de Tréville, is particularly attached to their majesties. What I have done, then, has been for the queen, and not at all for your grace. And still further, it is very probable I should not have done anything of this if it had not been to make myself agreeable to someone who is my lady, as the queen is yours."
"Yes," said the duke, smiling, And I even believe that I know that other person. It is—"
"My lord, I have not named her," interrupted the young man, warmly.
"That is true," said the duke, "and it is to this person I am bound to discharge my debt of gratitude."
"You have said, my lord, for truly, at this moment when there is a question of war, I confess to you that I see nothing in your grace but an Englishman, and consequently an enemy whom I should have much greater pleasure in meeting on the field of battle than in the park at Windsor or the corridors of the Louvre, all which, however, will not prevent me from executing to the very point my commission or from laying down my life, if there be need of it, to accomplish it. But I repeat it to your grace, without your having personally on that account more to thank me for in this second interview than for what I did for you in the first."
"We say, proud as a Scotsman," murmured the Duke of Buckingham.
"And we say, proud as a Gascon," replied D'Artagnan. "The Gascons are the Scots of France." D'Artagnan bowed to the duke, and was retiring. "Well, are you going away in that manner? Where and how?" "That's true." "'Fore God, these Frenchmen have no consideration." "I had forgotten that England was an island, and that you were the king of it." "Go to the riverside, ask for the brig Sund, and give this letter to the captain. He will convey you to a little port, where certainly you are not expected, and which is ordinarily only frequented by fishermen." "The name of that port?" "St. Valery. But listen. When you have arrived there, you will go to a mean tavern, without a name and without a sign, a mere fisherman's hut. You cannot be mistaken, there is but one. Afterward? You will ask for the host, and will repeat to him the word forward. Which means? In French, en avant. It is the password. He will give you a horse all saddled, and will point out to you the road you ought to take. You will find, in the same way, 4 relays on your route. If you will give at each of these relays your address in Paris, the 4 horses will follow you thither. You already know 2 of them, and you appeared to appreciate them like a judge. They were those we rode on, and you may rely upon me for the others not being inferior to them. These horses are equipped for the field. However proud you may be, you will not refuse to accept one of them, and to request your 3 companions to accept the others. That is, in order to make war against us. Besides, the end justified the means, as you Frenchmen say, does it not?" "Yes, my lord, I accept them," said D'Artagnan, "and if it please God, we will make good use of your presence."
"Well, now, your hand, young man. Perhaps we shall soon meet on the field of battle, but in the meantime we shall part good friends, I hope."
"Yes, my lord, but with the hope of soon becoming enemies."
"Be satisfied, I promise you that."
"I depend upon your word, my lord." D'Artagnan bowed to the duke, and made his way as quickly as possible to the riverside. Opposite the Tower of London, he found the vessel that had been named to him, delivered his letter to the captain, who, after having it examined by the governor of the port, made immediate preparations to sail. 50 vessels were waiting to set out. Passing alongside one of them, D'Artagnan fancied he perceived on board it the woman of Meung, the same whom the unknown gentleman had called Milady, and whom D'Artagnan had thought so handsome; but thanks to the current of the stream and a fair wind, his vessel passed so quickly that he had little more than a glimpse of her. The next day, about 9 o'clock in the morning, he landed at St. Valery. D'Artagnan went instantly in search of the inn, and easily discovered it by the riotous noise which resounded from it. War between England and France was talked of as near and certain, and the jolly sailors were having a carousal. D'Artagnan made his way through the crowd, advanced toward the host, and pronounced the word "Forward." The host instantly made him a sign to follow, went out with him by a door which opened into a yard, led him to the stable, where a saddled horse awaited him, and asked him if he stood in need of anything else. "I want to know the route I am to follow," said D'Artagnan.
Go from hence to Blangy, from Blangy to Neufchâtel. At Neufchâtel, go to the tavern of the Golden Harrow. Give the password to the landlord, and you will find, as you have here, a horse ready saddled."
"Have I anything to pay?" demanded D'Artagnan.
"Everything is paid," replied the host, "and liberally. Begone, and may God guide you."
"Amen!" cried the young man, and set off at full gallop. 4 hours later he was in Neufchâtel. He strictly followed the instructions he had received. At Neufchâtel, as at St. Valery, he found a horse quite ready and awaiting him. He was about to remove the pistols from the saddle he had quit to the one he was about to fill, but he found the holsters furnished with similar pistols. "Your address at Paris?" "Hotel of the Guards, Company of Dessessart."
"Enough,"
replied the questioner. "Which route must I take?" demanded D'Artagnan, in his turn.
"That of Rouen, but you will leave the city on your right. You must stop at the little village of Écueil, in which there is but one tavern, the Shield of France. Don't condemn it from appearances. You will find a horse in the stables quite as good as this."
"The same password?"
"Exactly."
"Adieu, master."
"A good journey, gentlemen. Do you want anything?"
D'Artagnan shook his head and set off at full speed. At Écueil, the same scene was repeated. He found as provident a host and a fresh horse. He left his address as he had done before, and set off again at the same pace for Pontoise. At Pontoise he changed his horse for the last time, and at 9 o'clock galloped into the yard of Tréville's hotel. He had made nearly 60 leagues in little more than 12 hours. Monsieur de Tréville received him as if he had seen him that same morning. Only, when pressing his hand a little more warmly than usual, he informed him that the company of Dessessart was on duty at the Louvre, and that he might repair at once to his post. End of chapter. Chapter 22 of The Three Musketeers. The Ballet of La Merlaison. On the morrow nothing was talked of in Paris but the ball which the aldermen of the city were to give to the king and queen, and in which their majesties were to dance the famous La Merlaison, the favourite ballet of the king. 8 days had been occupied in preparations at the Hôtel de Ville for this important evening. The city carpenters had erected scaffolds upon which the invited ladies were to be placed. The city grocer had ornamented the chambers with 200 flambeaux of white wax, a piece of luxury unheard of at that period, and 20 violins were ordered, and the price for them fixed at double the usual rate, upon condition, said the report, that they should be played all night. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the Sieur de Lacoste, ensign in the king's guards, followed by 2 officers and several archers of that body, came to the city registrar, named Clement, and demanded of him all the keys of the rooms and offices of the hotel. These keys were given up to him instantly. Each of them had ticket attached to it, by which it might be recognized, and from that moment the Sieur de Lacoste was charged with the care of all the doors and all the avenues. At 11 o'clock came in his turn Duhallier, captain of the guards, bringing with him 50 archers, who were distributed immediately through the Hôtel de Ville at the doors assigned them. At 3 o'clock came 2 companies of the guards, one French, the other Swiss. The company of French guards was composed of half of Monsieur Duhallier's men and half of Monsieur Dessessart's men. At 6 in the evening the guests began to come. As fast as they entered they were placed in the grand saloon, on the platforms prepared for them. At 9 o'clock, Madame la Première Présidente arrived. As next to the Queen she was the most considerable personage of the fête, she was received by the city officials and placed in a box opposite to that which the Queen was to occupy. At 10 o'clock, the king's collation, consisting of preserves and other delicacies, was prepared in the little room on the side of the church of Saint Jean, in front of the silver buffet of the city, which was guarded by 4 archers.
At midnight great cries and loud acclamations were heard. It was the king, who was passing through the streets which led from the Louvre to the Hôtel de Ville, and which were all illuminated with coloured lanterns. Immediately the aldermen, clothed in their cloth robes and preceded by 6 sergeants, each holding a flambeau in his hand, went to attend upon the king, whom they met on the steps, where the provost of the merchants made him the speech of welcome, a compliment to which his majesty replied with an apology for coming so late, laying the blame upon the cardinal, who had detained him till 11 o'clock, talking of affairs of state. His Majesty in full dress was accompanied by His Royal Highness Monsieur le Comte de Soissons, by the Grand Prior, by the Duc de Longueville, by the Duc de Boeuf, by the Comte d'Harcourt, by the Comte de la Roche-Guyon, by Monsieur de Liancourt, by Monsieur de Baradas, by the Comte de Cramaille, and by the Chevalier de Souveret. Everybody noticed that the king looked dull and preoccupied. A private room had been prepared for the king and another for Monsieur. In each of these closets were placed masquerade dresses. The same had been done for the queen and Madame le Président. The nobles and ladies of their Majesty's suites were to dress, 2 by 2, in chambers prepared for the purpose. Before entering his closet, the king desired to be informed the moment the cardinal arrived. Half an hour after the entrance of the king, fresh acclamations were heard. These announced the arrival of the queen. The aldermen did as they had done before, and, preceded by their sergeants, advanced to receive their illustrious guest. The queen entered the great hall, and it was remarked that, like the king, she looked dull and even weary. At the moment she entered, the curtain of a small gallery which to that time had been closed was drawn, and the pale face of the cardinal appeared, he being dressed as a Spanish cavalier. His eyes were fixed upon those of the queen, and a smile of terrible joy passed over his lips. The queen did not wear her diamond studs. The queen remained for a short time to receive the compliments of the city dignitaries and to reply to the salutations of the ladies. All at once the king appeared with the cardinal at one of the doors of the hall. The cardinal was speaking to him in a low voice, and the king was very pale. The king made his way through the crowd without a mask, and the ribbons of his doublet scarcely tied. He went straight to the queen, and in an altered voice said,
"Why, madame, have you not thought proper to wear your diamond studs, when you know it would give me so much gratification?"
The queen cast a glance around her, and saw the cardinal behind, with a diabolical smile on his countenance. "Sire," replied the queen, with a faltering voice, "because, in the midst of a crowd such as this, I have feared some accident might happen to them."
"And you are wrong, madame. If I made you that present, it was that you might adorn yourself therewith. I tell you that you were wrong."
The voice of the king was tremulous with anger. Everybody looked and listened with astonishment, comprehending nothing of what passed. "Sire," said the queen, "I can send for them to the Louvre, where they are, and thus your Majesty's wishes will be complied with."
"Do so, madam, do so, and that at once, for within an hour the ballet will commence."
The queen bent in token of submission, and followed the ladies who were to conduct her to her room. On his part, the king returned to his apartment. There was a moment of trouble and confusion in the assembly. Everybody had remarked that something had passed between the king and queen, but both of them had spoken so low that everybody, out of respect, withdrew several steps so that nobody had heard anything. The violins began to sound with all their might, but nobody listened to them. The king came out first from his room. He was in a most elegant hunting costume, and Monsieur and the other nobles were dressed like him. This was the costume that best became the king. So dressed, he really appeared the first gentleman of his kingdom. The cardinal drew near to the king and placed in his hand a small casket. The king opened it and found in it 2 diamond studs.
What does this mean?
Demanded he of the cardinal. Nothing, replied the latter. Only if the queen has the studs, which I very much doubt, count them, sire, and if you only find 10, ask her majesty who can have stolen from her the 2 studs that are here. The king looked at the cardinal as if to interrogate him, but he had not time to address any question to him. A cry of admiration burst from every mouth. If the king appeared to be the first gentleman of his kingdom, the queen was, without doubt, the most beautiful woman in France. It is true that the habit of a huntress became her admirably. She wore a beaver hat with blue feathers, a surtout of grey pearl velvet, fastened with diamond clasps, and a petticoat of blue satin embroidered with silver. On her left shoulder sparkled the diamond studs, on a bow of the same colour as the plumes and the petticoat. The king trembled with joy, and the cardinal with vexation. Although, distant as they were from the queen, they could not count the studs. The queen had them. The only question was, had she 10 or 12? At that moment the violins sounded the signal for the ballet. The king advanced toward Madame the President, with whom he was to dance, and his Highness Monsieur with the queen. They took their places, and the ballet began. The king danced facing the queen, and every time he passed by her, he devoured with his eyes those studs of which he could not ascertain the number. A cold sweat covered the brow of the cardinal. The ballet lasted an hour, and had 16 entrées. The ballet ended amid the applause of the whole assemblage, and everyone reconducted his lady to her place. But the king took advantage of the privilege he had of leaving his lady to advance eagerly toward the queen. "I thank you, madame," said he, "for the deference you have shown to my wishes. But I think you want 2 of the studs, and I bring them back to you." With these words he held out to the queen the 2 studs the cardinal had given him. "How, sire?" cried the young queen, affecting surprise. "You were giving me, then, 2 more. I shall have 14. In fact, the king counted them, and the 12 studs were all on her majesty's shoulder. The king called the cardinal. "What does this mean, Monsieur Cardinal?" asked the king in a severe tone. "This means, sire," replied the cardinal, "that I was desirous of presenting her majesty with these 2 studs, and that, not daring to offer them myself, I adopted this means of inducing her to accept them." "And I am the more grateful to your eminence," replied Anne of Austria, with a smile that proved she was not the dupe of this ingenious gallantry, "from being certain that these 2 studs alone have cost you as much as all the others cost his majesty." Then, saluting the king and the cardinal, the queen resumed her way to the chamber in which she had dressed, and where she was to take off her costume. The attention which we have been obliged to give, during the commencement of the chapter, to the illustrious personages we have introduced into it, has diverted us for an instant from him to whom Anne of Austria owed the extraordinary triumph she had obtained over the cardinal, and who, confounded, unknown, lost in the crowd gathered at one of the doors, looked on at this scene, comprehensible only to 4 persons: the king, the queen, his eminence, and himself. The queen had just regained her chamber, and D'Artagnan was about to retire, when he felt his shoulder lightly touched. He turned and saw a young woman, who made a sign to follow her. The face of this young woman was covered with a black velvet mask, but notwithstanding this precaution, which was in fact taken rather against others than against him, he at once recognized his usual guide, the light and intelligent Madame Bonacieux. On the evening before, they had scarcely seen each other for a moment at the apartment of the Swiss guard, Germain, whither D'Artagnan had sent for her. The haste which the young woman was in to convey to the queen the excellent news of the happy return of her messenger prevented the 2 lovers from exchanging more than a few words. D'Artagnan therefore followed Madame Bonacieux, moved by a double sentiment, love and curiosity. All the way, and in proportion as the corridors became more deserted, D'Artagnan wished to stop the young woman, seize her, and gaze upon her, were it only for a minute. But quick as a bird she glided between his hands, and when he wished to speak to her, her finger placed upon her mouth, with a little imperative gesture full of grace, reminded him that he was under the command of a power which he must blindly obey, and which forbade him even to make the slightest complaint. At length, after winding about for a minute or two, Madame Bonacieux opened the door of a closet which was entirely dark, and led D'Artagnan into it. There she made a fresh sign of silence, and opened a second door concealed by tapestry. The opening of this door disclosed a brilliant light, and she disappeared. D'Artagnan remained for a moment motionless, asking himself where he could be. But soon a ray of light which penetrated through the chamber, together with the warm and perfumed air which reached him from the same aperture, the conversation of two of three ladies in language at once respectful and refined, and the word majesty, several times repeated, indicated clearly that he was in a closet attached to the queen's apartment. The young man waited in comparative darkness and listened. The queen appeared cheerful and happy, which seemed to astonish the persons who surrounded her, and who were accustomed to see her almost always sad and full of care. The queen attributed this joyous feeling to the beauty of the fête, to the pleasure she had experienced in the ballet, and as it is not permissible to contradict a queen, whether she smile or weep, everybody expatiated on the gallantry of the alderman of the city of Paris. Although D'Artagnan did not at all know the queen, he soon distinguished her voice from the others, at first by a slightly foreign accent, and next by that tone of domination naturally impressed upon all royal words. He heard her approach and withdraw from the partially open door, and twice or three times he even saw the shadow of a person intercept the light. At length a hand and an arm, surpassingly beautiful in their form and whiteness, glided through the tapestry. D'Artagnan at once comprehended that this was his recompense. He cast himself on his knees, seized the hand, and touched it respectfully with his lips. Then the hand was withdrawn, leaving in his an object which he perceived to be a ring. The door immediately closed, and D'Artagnan found himself again in complete obscurity. D'Artagnan placed the ring on his finger and again waited. It was evident that all was not yet over. After the reward of his devotion, that of his love was to come. Besides, although the ballet was danced, the evening had scarcely begun. Supper was to be served at 3, and the clock of Saint Jean had struck 2:75. The sound of voices diminished by degrees in the adjoining chamber. The company was then heard departing. Then the door of the closet in which D'Artagnan was opened, and Madame Bonacieux entered. "You at last!" cried D'Artagnan. "Silence!" said the young woman, placing her hand upon his lips. "Silence, and go the same way you came." "But where and when shall I see you again?" cried D'Artagnan. "A note which you will find at home will tell you. Begone! Begone!" At these words, she opened the door of the corridor and pushed D'Artagnan out of the room. D'Artagnan obeyed like a child, without the least resistance or objection, which proved that he was really in love. End of chapter. Chapter 23 of The Three Musketeers. The Rendezvous. D'Artagnan ran home immediately, and although it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and he had some of the worst quarters of Paris to traverse, he met with no misadventure. Everyone knows that drunkards and lovers have a protecting deity. He found the door of his passage open, sprang up the stairs, and knocked softly in a manner agreed upon between him and his lackey. Planchet, whom he had sent home 2 hours before from the Hôtel de Ville, telling him to sit up for him, opened the door for him. Now, the reader may ask, how came Planchet here, when he was left, "stiff as a rush," in London? In the intervening time, Buckingham perhaps sent him to Paris, as he did the horses.
Has anyone brought a letter for me? Asked D'Artagnan, eagerly. No one has brought a letter, monsieur, replied Planchet, but one has come of itself. What do you mean, blockhead? I mean to say that when I came in, although I had the key of your apartment in my pocket, and that key has never quit me, I found a letter on the green table cover in your bedroom. And where is that letter? I left it where I found it, monsieur. It is not natural for letters to enter people's houses in this manner. If the window had been open, or even ajar, I should think nothing of it. But no, all was hermetically sealed. Beware, monsieur, there is certainly some magic underneath.
Meanwhile, the young man had darted into his chamber and opened the letter. It was from Madame Bonacieux, and was expressed in these terms: There are many thanks to be offered to you, and to be transmitted to you. Be this evening about 10 o'clock at St. Cloud, in front of the pavilion which stands in the corner of the house of Monsieur d'Estrées. Signed, C.B. While reading this letter, D'Artagnan felt his heart dilated and compressed by that delicious spasm which tortures and caresses the hearts of lovers. It was the first billet he had received. It was the first rendezvous that had been granted him. His heart, swelled by the intoxication of joy, felt ready to dissolve away at the very gate of that terrestrial paradise called love. Well, monsieur, said Planchet, who had observed his master grow red and pale successively, did I not guess truly? Is it not some bad affair? You are mistaken, Planchet, replied D'Artagnan, and as a proof, there is a crown to drink my health. Ah, I am much obliged to monsieur for the crown he has given me, and I promise him to follow his instructions exactly. But it is not the less true that letters which come in this way and to shut up houses fall from heaven, my friend, fall from heaven. Then monsieur is satisfied? Asked Planchet. My dear Planchet, I am the happiest of men. And I may profit by monsieur's happiness and go to bed? Yes, go. May the blessings of heaven fall upon monsieur. But it is not the less true that that letter. And Planchet retired, shaking his head with an air of doubt which the liberality of D'Artagnan had not entirely effaced. Left alone, D'Artagnan read and reread his billet. Then he kissed and rekissed 20 times the lines traced by the hand of his beautiful mistress. At length he went to bed, fell asleep, and had golden dreams. At 7 o'clock in the morning he arose and called Planchet, who at the second summons opened the door, his countenance not yet quite freed from the anxiety of the preceding night. Planchet, said D'Artagnan, I am going out for all day, perhaps. You are therefore your own master till 7 o'clock in the evening, but at 7 o'clock you must hold yourself in readiness with 2 horses. There, said Planchet, we are going again, it appears, to have our hides pierced in all sorts of ways. You will take your musketoon and your pistols. There now, didn't I say so? Cried Planchet. I was sure of it, the cursed letter. Don't be afraid, you idiot. There is nothing in hand but a party of pleasure. Ah, like the charming journey the other day, when it rained bullets and produced a crop of steel traps. Well, if you are really afraid, Monsieur Planchet, resumed D'Artagnan, I will go without you. I prefer travelling alone to having a companion who entertains the least fear. Monsieur does me wrong, said Planchet. I thought he had seen me at work. Yes, but I thought perhaps you had worn out all your courage the first time. Monsieur shall see that upon occasion I have some left. Only I beg monsieur not to be too prodigal of it if he wishes it to last long. Do you believe you still have a certain amount of it to expend this evening?
I hope so, monsieur. Well, then, I count on you. At the appointed hour I shall be ready. Only I believed that monsieur had but one horse in the guard's stables. Perhaps there is but one at this moment, but by this evening there will be four. It appears that our journey was a remounting journey, then? Exactly so, said D'Artagnan, and nodding to Planchet, he went out. Monsieur Bonacieux was at his door. D'Artagnan's intention was to go out without speaking to the worthy mercer, but the latter made so polite and friendly a salutation that his tenant felt obliged not only to stop, but to enter into conversation with him. Besides, how is it possible to avoid a little condescension toward a husband whose pretty wife has appointed a meeting with you that same evening at St. Cloud, opposite d'Estrées's pavilion? D'Artagnan approached him with the most amiable air he could assume. The conversation naturally fell upon the incarceration of the poor man. Monsieur Bonacieux, who was ignorant that D'Artagnan had overheard his conversation with the stranger of Meung, related to his young tenant the persecutions of that monster, Monsieur de Laffemas, whom he had never ceased to designate, during his account, by the title of the Cardinal's executioner, and expatiated at great length upon the Bastille, the bolts, the wickets, the dungeons, the gratings, the instruments of torture. D'Artagnan listened to him with exemplary complacence, and when he had finished, said, "And Madame Bonacieux, do you know who carried her off? For I do not forget that I owe to that unpleasant circumstance the good fortune of having made your acquaintance." "Ah!" said Bonacieux, "they took good care not to tell me that. And my wife, on her part, has sworn to me by all that's sacred that she does not know. But you," continued Monsieur Bonacieux, in a tone of perfect good fellowship, "what has become of you all these days? I have not seen you nor your friends, and I don't think you could gather all that dust that I saw Planchet brush off your boots yesterday from the pavement of Paris." "You're right, my dear Monsieur Bonacieux. My friends and I have been on a little journey." "Far from here?" "Oh, Lord, no. About 40 leagues only. We went to take Monsieur Athos to the waters of Forges, where my friends still remain." "And you have returned, have you not?" replied Monsieur Bonacieux, giving his countenance a most sly air. "A handsome young fellow like you does not obtain long leaves of absence from his mistress, and we were impatiently waited for at Paris, were we not?" "My faith," said the young man, laughing, "I confess it, and so much more the readily, my dear Bonacieux, as I see there is no concealing anything from you. Yes, I was expected, and very impatiently, I acknowledge." A slight shade passed over the brow of Bonacieux, but so slight that D'Artagnan did not perceive it. "And we are going to be recompensed for our diligence?" continued the mercer, with a trifling alteration in his voice, so trifling, indeed, that D'Artagnan did not perceive it any more than he had the momentary shade which, an instant before, had darkened the countenance of the worthy man. "Ah, may you be a true prophet!" said D'Artagnan, laughing. "No, what I say," replied Bonacieux, "is only that I may know whether I am delaying you." "Why that question, my dear host?" asked D'Artagnan. "Do you intend to sit up for me?" "No, but since my arrest and the robbery that was committed in my house, I am alarmed every time I hear a door open, particularly in the night. What the deuce can you expect? I am no swordsman." "Well, don't be alarmed if I return at 1, 2, or 3 o'clock in the morning. Indeed, do not be alarmed if I do not come at all." This time Bonacieux became so pale that D'Artagnan could not help perceiving it, and asked him what was the matter. "Nothing," replied Bonacieux, "nothing. Since my misfortunes I have been subject to faintnesses, which seize me all at once, and I have just felt a cold shiver. Pay no attention to it.
You have nothing to occupy yourself with but being happy.
Then I have full occupation, for I am so.
Not yet. Wait a little. This evening, you said.
Well, this evening will come, thank God, and perhaps you look for it with as much impatience as I do. Perhaps this evening Madame Bonacieux will visit the conjugal domicile.
Madame Bonacieux is not at liberty this evening, replied the husband seriously. She is detained at the Louvre this evening by her duties.
So much the worse for you, my dear host, so much the worse. When I am happy, I wish all the world to be so, but it appears that is not possible. The young man departed, laughing at the joke, which he thought he alone could comprehend.
Amuse yourself well, replied Bonacieux in a sepulchral tone.
But D'Artagnan was too far off to hear him, and if he had heard him in the disposition of mind he then enjoyed, he certainly would not have remarked it. He took his way toward the hotel of Monsieur de Tréville. His visit of the day before, it is to be remembered, had been very short and very little explicative. He found Tréville in a joyful mood. He had thought the king and queen charming at the ball. It is true the cardinal had been particularly ill-tempered. He had retired at 1 o'clock under the pretence of being indisposed. As to their majesties, they did not return to the Louvre till 6 o'clock in the morning.
Now, said Tréville, lowering his voice, and looking into every corner of the apartment to see if they were alone, now let us talk about yourself, my young friend, for it is evident that your happy return had something to do with the joy of the king, the triumph of the queen, and the humiliation of his eminence. You must look out for yourself.
What have I to fear? Replied D'Artagnan, as long as I shall have the luck to enjoy the favour of their majesties.
Everything, believe me. The cardinal is not the man to forget a mystification until he has settled account with the mystifier, and the mystifier appears to me to have the air of being a certain young Gascon of my acquaintance.
Do you believe that the cardinal is as well posted as yourself, and knows that I have been to London?
The devil! You have been to London?
Was it from London you brought that beautiful diamond that glitters on your finger?
Beware, my dear D'Artagnan. A present from an enemy is not a good thing. Are there not some Latin verses upon that subject? Stop.
Yes, doubtless, replied D'Artagnan, who had never been able to cram the first rudiments of that language into his head, and who had by his ignorance driven his master to despair. Yes, doubtless there is one.
There certainly is one,
said Monsieur de Tréville, who had a tincture of literature.
And Monsieur de Benserade was quoting it to me the other day. Stop a minute. Ah, this is it. Timeo Daneos et dona ferentes, which means, beware of the enemy who makes you presents.
This diamond did not come from an enemy, monsieur, replied D'Artagnan. It comes from the queen.
From the queen? Oh, oh, said Monsieur de Tréville. Why, it is indeed a true royal jewel, which is worth 1,000 pistoles if it is worth a denier. By whom did the queen send you this jewel?
She gave it to me herself.
Where?
In the room adjoining the chamber in which she changed her toilet.
How?
Giving me her hand to kiss.
You have kissed the queen's hand, said Monsieur de Tréville, looking earnestly at D'Artagnan.
Her Majesty did me the honour to grant me that favour.
And that in the presence of witnesses. Imprudent, thrice imprudent.
No, monsieur, be satisfied. Nobody saw her, replied D'Artagnan, and he related to Monsieur de Tréville how the affair came to pass.
Oh, the women, cried the old soldier. I know them by their romantic imagination. Everything that savours of mystery charms them. So you have seen the arm, that was all. You would meet the queen, and she would not know who you are?
No, but thanks to this diamond, replied the young man.
Listen, said Monsieur de Tréville. Shall I give you counsel, good counsel, the counsel of a friend?"
"You will do me honour, monsieur," said D'Artagnan.
"Well, then, off to the nearest goldsmith's, and sell that diamond for the highest price you can get from him. However much of a Jew he may be, he will give you at least 800 pistoles. Pistoles have no name, young man, and that ring has a terrible one, which may betray him who wears it."
"Sell this ring? A ring which comes from my sovereign? Never!" said D'Artagnan.
"Then at least turn the gem inside, you silly fellow. For everyone must be aware that a cadet from Gascony does not find such stones in his mother's jewel case."
"You think, then, that I have something to dread?" asked D'Artagnan.
"I mean to say, young man, that he who sleeps over a mine, the match of which is already lighted, may consider himself in safety in comparison with you."
"The devil!"
said D'Artagnan, whom the positive tone of Monsieur de Tréville began to disquiet.
"The devil! What must I do?"
"Above all things, be always on your guard. The cardinal has a tenacious memory and a long arm. You may depend upon it, he will repay you by some ill turn."
"But of what sort?"
"Eh? How can I tell? Has he not all the tricks of a demon at his command? The least that can be expected is that you will be arrested."
"What? Will they dare to arrest a man in his Majesty's service?"
"Pardieu, they did not scruple much in the case of Athos. At all events, young man, rely upon one who has been 30 years at court. Do not lull yourself in security, or you will be lost. But, on the contrary, and it is I who say it, see enemies in all directions. If anyone seeks a quarrel with you, shun it, were it with a child of 10 years old. If you are attacked by day or by night, fight, but retreat without shame. If you cross a bridge, feel every plank of it with your foot, lest one should give way beneath you. If you pass before a house which is being built, look up, for fear a stone should fall upon your head. If you stay out late, be always followed by your lackey, and let your lackey be armed, if, by the by, you can be sure of your lackey. Mistrust everybody. Your friend, your brother, your mistress above all."
D'Artagnan blushed. "My mistress above all," repeated he, mechanically. "And why her rather than another?"
"Because a mistress is one of the cardinal's favourite means. He has not one that is more expeditious. A woman will sell you for 10 pistoles, witness Delilah. You are acquainted with the Scriptures?"
D'Artagnan thought of the appointment Madame Bonacieux had made with him for that very evening, but we are bound to say, to the credit of our hero, that the bad opinion entertained by Monsieur de Tréville of women in general did not inspire him with the least suspicion of his pretty hostess.
"But, apropos," resumed Monsieur de Tréville, "what has become of your 3 companions?"
"I was about to ask you if you had heard any news of them?"
"None, monsieur."
"Well, I left them on my road. Porthos at Chantilly, with a duel on his hands; Aramis at Crèvecoeur, with a ball in his shoulder; and Athos at Amiens, detained by an accusation of coining."
"See there, now," said Monsieur de Tréville. "And how the devil did you escape?"
"By a miracle, monsieur, I must acknowledge, with a sword thrust in my breast, and by nailing the Comte de Wardes on the by road to Calais, like a butterfly on a tapestry."
"There again! De Wardes, one of the cardinal's men, a cousin of Rochefort. Stop, my friend. I have an idea."
"Speak, monsieur."
"In your place, I would do one thing."
"What?"
"While his Eminence was seeking for me in Paris, I would take, without sound of drum or trumpet, the road to Picardy, and would go and make some inquiries concerning my 3 companions. What the devil! They merit richly that piece of attention on your part."
"The advice is good, monsieur, and tomorrow I will set out."
"Tomorrow. Any why not this evening?"
"This evening, monsieur, I am detained in Paris by indispensable business."
"Ah, young man, some flirtation or other. Take care, I repeat to you, take care. It is woman who has ruined us, still ruins us, and will ruin us as long as the world stands. Take my advice and set out this evening."
"Impossible, monsieur."
"You have given your word, then?"
"Yes, monsieur."
"Ah, that's quite another thing. But promise me, if you should not be killed tonight, that you will go tomorrow."
"I promise it."
"Do you need money?"
"I have still 50 pistoles. That, I think, is as much as I shall want."
"But your companions?"
"I don't think they can be in need of any. We left Paris, each with 75 pistoles in his pocket."
"Shall I see you again before your departure?"
"I think not, monsieur, unless something new should happen."
"Well, a pleasant journey."
"Thanks, monsieur." D'Artagnan left Monsieur de Tréville, touched more than ever by his paternal solicitude for his Musketeers. He called successively at the abodes of Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. Neither of them had returned; their lackeys likewise were absent, and nothing had been heard of either the one or the other. He would have inquired after them of their mistresses, but he was neither acquainted with Porthos's nor Aramis's, and as to Athos, he had none. As he passed the Hôtel des Gardes, he took a glance into the stables. 3 of the 4 horses had already arrived. Planchet, all astonishment, was busy grooming them, and had already finished too.
"Ah, monsieur," said Planchet, on perceiving D'Artagnan, "how glad I am to see you."
"Why so, Planchet?" asked the young man.
"Do you place confidence in our landlord, Monsieur Bonacieux?"
"I? Not the least in the world."
"Oh, you do quite right, monsieur."
"But why this question?"
"Because, while you were talking with him, I watched you without listening to you. And, monsieur, his countenance changed colour 2 or 3 times."
"Bah!"
"Preoccupied as monsieur was with the letter he had received, he did not observe that. But I, whom the strange fashion in which that letter came into the house had placed on my guard, I did not lose a movement of his features."
"And you found it?"
"Traitorous, monsieur."
"Indeed."
"Still more. As soon as monsieur had left and disappeared round the corner of the street, Monsieur Bonacieux took his hat, shut his door, and set off at a quick pace in an opposite direction."
"It seems you are right, Planchet. All this appears to be a little mysterious, and be assured that we will not pay him our rent until the matter shall be categorically explained to us."
"Monsieur jests, but monsieur will see."
"What would you have, Planchet? What must come is written."
"Monsieur does not then renounce his excursion for this evening?"
"Quite the contrary, Planchet. The more ill will I have toward Monsieur Bonacieux, the more punctual I shall be in keeping the appointment made by that letter which makes you so uneasy."
"Then that is monsieur's determination."
"Undeniably, my friend. At 9 o'clock, then, be ready here at the hotel. I will come and take you." Planchet, seeing there was no longer any hope of making his master renounce his project, heaved a profound sigh and set to work to groom the 3rd horse. As to D'Artagnan, being at bottom a prudent youth, instead of returning home, went and dined with the Gascon priest, who, at the time of the distress of the 4 friends, had given them a breakfast of chocolate. End of chapter.